Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought I'd be that person who hears strange noises in an empty building at night. I always believed I was too practical for that kind of thing. Too focused on my job to pay attention to quiet creaks or flickering lights. But a month ago, everything changed for me at the public school where I teach extra tutoring sessions. It started with soft laughter and muffled conversation in the hallway. It was so faint that I almost missed it the first time. It was close to 10 at night and I was sure everyone else had gone home. My first instinct was that maybe a couple of students were still around, talking or messing around in some corner. I went back up the stairs to check, but I didn't see anyone. All the lights were off. Every classroom door was locked. And yet, I was certain I had heard voices. I shrugged it off that night, thinking I might be overtired or something like that. But it didn't end there. The next few nights, the same thing happened. I heard whispers echoing down the second-floor corridor as I headed for the stairs. Then I heard footsteps like someone running in the distance. I'd stop on the stairs to listen, but the sounds would fade out, replaced by a heavy silence. My heart would thump and I'd tell myself it was just the old building settling or the central heating pipes clanking. Still, I felt uneasy. I started finishing my paperwork in the main office instead of in my regular classroom, just so I wouldn't have to walk through that corridor alone. It's a long hallway with classrooms on both sides. The overhead lights tend to flicker if you turn them on too quickly. The floor tiles squeak in certain spots. The doors have these small rectangular windows that let you peek inside the rooms. I've always thought that was a practical design, but it takes on a different feel at night when no one's around. I found myself speeding up whenever I passed those doors. I decided to ask the night shift janitor if he'd ever heard anything strange. He's a quiet guy, always polite but never chatty. When I brought it up, he looked at me with a tense expression and just said, "Yeah, I've heard some things." He didn't elaborate. I tried pressing for details, like whether he'd seen anyone or found a reason for the noises. He shrugged and said, "I don't really want to talk about it." That caught me off guard. He's usually not so closed off. When I saw his reaction, I felt a chill run through my arms. It wasn't cold in the hallway, but I got goosebumps. I think that was the first time I realized I wasn't imagining any of this. Someone else had experienced it, and he clearly didn't like discussing it. A few nights later, I stayed until almost 10:30 grading tests. The building was dead silent. I was in one of the rooms on the first floor by the main entrance. I felt safer there, like I could just walk out the front door without having to venture upstairs. But I needed some notebooks I had left in my usual classroom on the second floor, so I forced myself to go up. The corridor was dark. I switched on a row of lights. They buzzed and flickered before stabilizing. As I walked, I heard a light tapping sound behind me. I turned around. Nobody was there. My pulse sped up. I walked faster, trying to reach my classroom quickly. Halfway down, I heard the tapping again, this time from somewhere in front. It sounded like knuckles rapping against a metal locker door. I froze for a second, listening. The lights flickered again. I took a few more steps, reached my classroom, and got my notebooks. On my way back, I glanced into a room at the end of the corridor. The door had that rectangular window in it, and I saw a figure sitting in the far corner. The person looked like a woman, facing the wall. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it had burst. I was relieved to see someone else there because at that point I just wanted a living person around. But something about the way she was sitting felt wrong. She was too still, like she wasn't breathing. I could see a slight outline of her shoulders and head, nothing else. My palms were clammy. I considered calling out to her or knocking on the door, but I hesitated. Then I told myself that it was better to check than to ignore it. Maybe it was a teacher who had dozed off or an adult student waiting for a ride. I turned the doorknob. The lights in the corridor flickered again, almost going out. When I pushed the door open, I saw empty desks and chairs. No one was there. The corner was empty. I felt a tightening in my chest. My legs seemed heavier than usual and my head was spinning with questions. I shut the door, locked it, and walked back downstairs. My hands were shaking. The building felt too quiet, like someone had turned off all outside noise. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled. When I passed by the janitor's room, his door was closed and the light was off, so I figured he might be in another wing of the school or maybe outside by the service entrance. I didn't bother looking for him. I just wanted to leave. The moment I stepped outside, I breathed in the cool night air. It felt refreshing and real, more real than whatever I'd just witnessed upstairs. I got in my car, locked the doors right away, and sat there for a minute, trying to calm down before driving. Over the next week, I tried to switch up my schedule so I wouldn't be the last person leaving. I started begging one of the other teachers, who usually leaves around 9, to stay a little later to chat or compare notes. She obliged a couple of times, but she didn't want to stick around too long either. She never mentioned hearing anything strange, and I was too embarrassed to bring it up. It's not exactly easy to say, "Hey, I think I'm hearing voices in the hall and seeing things in empty rooms. Want to hang around with me?" So I ended up alone again a few nights later. That's when the door slamming started. It was around 9:45. I was reorganizing some papers. The entire second floor was dark except for my classroom. Suddenly I heard a door slam in the distance down by the science labs. It was so loud that I jumped. My first thought was that the janitor was closing up, but I remembered how quiet he usually is. I waited, hoping he'd show up. He never came by. Then another door slammed. The echo rattled the metal lockers. I dropped my pen and walked into the hallway. Nothing. The lights were off. I called out, "Hello?" My voice carried down the corridor, but I got no response. My stomach was in knots. I walked slowly, each step echoing. The hallway seemed endless. I got to the science lab doors. They were all locked. None were open, let alone recently shut with enough force to cause that noise. I felt sweat trickling down my back. I glanced behind me a few times, expecting to see someone lurking, but I was alone. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 9:55. I realized I couldn't spend another minute in that building. I headed straight for the stairs. As I reached the top step, I heard footsteps running up behind me. They were rapid, almost frantic. My heart pounded in my ears. I spun around. The corridor was empty, but the footsteps continued for another second or two before stopping abruptly. I felt an odd pressure in my ears, like the air had changed. I bolted down the stairs 2 at a time, not caring if I might fall. My breathing was loud and ragged. When I got to the first floor, the security lights in the hall were flickering. I passed the main office and practically jogged to the front door. After I got out, I turned back to see if anyone was following me. The windows were dark. There was no sign of movement, no silhouette. It was like the building was asleep. I didn't waste another second. I left. The next day, I confronted the janitor again. I asked him if he'd slammed any doors the previous night. He said no. He told me he'd been mopping the cafeteria, which is on the other side of the school, and hadn't been upstairs after 8:30. I told him what I heard. He looked uneasy. Then he admitted he sometimes hears banging from upstairs when he's down in the basement. He used to check it out, but he stopped bothering because every time he went, there was nothing there. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything strange in the classrooms. He hesitated, then said, "I don't want to discuss that," and walked away. He looked scared. I started feeling tense about going to work at all. Even during the day, I found myself watching the corners, expecting to see someone or something. But it was at night that everything felt heavier. A few times I considered telling the principal, but I didn't have anything concrete to say. I'm hearing noises isn't exactly proof of a problem, and I was worried he'd laugh it off or think I was being dramatic. I tried to focus on my tutoring sessions, but it was impossible not to feel anxious as the day wore on and people began leaving. Around 8 or 9 at night, my hands would start to shake. I'd start double-checking the hallway, turning on more lights than usual. By the time I actually finished, the tension in my chest felt like a tight coil. The last event that pushed me over the edge happened last week. It was close to 10 again. I was alone in the teacher's lounge on the second floor, which is near that corridor where I keep hearing things. I had turned on every light in the hallway, hoping that would keep the atmosphere from feeling so eerie. The lounge door was propped open so I could see out into the corridor. As I gathered my papers, I heard soft laughter again. It sounded like 2 or 3 people talking quietly, followed by a hushed chuckle. My mouth went dry. I moved to the doorway to look. The corridor was empty, but the laughter was clearer than before, as if they were right around the corner. I stepped out into the hall and slowly walked toward the corner, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. My stomach felt tense, and my ears were almost ringing from the blood rushing through my head. I reached the corner and saw no one. The laughter cut off. The silence was unnerving. I started backing up, planning to return to the lounge to grab my things and get out. That's when I saw a door further down the corridor swing open by itself. It wasn't a gentle push. It flung open, hit the rubber stopper on the wall, and then swung back halfway, staying ajar. I stood frozen for a few seconds, afraid to go near it. My breathing got shallow. I took a few steps forward, holding my breath, and peeked inside. It was dark, so I flicked the light switch on. The fluorescent lights hummed for a moment, then revealed empty desks, empty walls, and nothing else. But the door had definitely moved. I thought maybe a draft had pushed it, but there were no windows open, no fans running. I stood there, confused and scared. Then something in the corner of the room caught my eye. It wasn't a shape or a person. It was just a slight movement, like a shadow shifting on the floor. I jumped back, nearly dropping my papers. The shadow disappeared, like it merged with the darker part of the floor. At that moment, I felt this coldness on the back of my neck, like a sudden burst of icy air. My scalp tingled. I backed away from the door and turned toward the stairs. I think I moved faster than I ever have in my life, not bothering to shut off any lights. I rushed down to the first floor, found the main exit, and left the building in seconds. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the engine running. Even then, my hands were trembling so hard that I had trouble putting the key in the ignition. I haven't stopped my tutoring sessions because I can't afford to. But now I leave before 8 whenever I can. If I absolutely must stay late, I stick to the first floor and stay near the main entrance. I haven't gone back up to the second floor after dark in a week. I know I'm not imagining these things. I know there's something off about that hallway. It's like the building has pockets of sound and movement that appear when the rest of the place is empty. I've heard laughter, steps, doors slamming, even tapping. And I saw that silhouette once through the door's window, a woman in the corner of the room. I didn't hallucinate that. I know what I saw. Every time I walk in now, my heart rate picks up. I keep telling myself it's just an old building, that pipes and ventilation systems can create weird noises and that light can play tricks on your eyes. But part of me knows that's not enough to explain the doors slamming, the running footsteps, and the figure I saw. I don't know if there's a logical explanation. What I do know is that I can't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I'm there after dark. Sometimes I feel it even during the day, like something's following me from room to room, staying just out of sight. I haven't told any of the other staff about it except for the janitor, and he's not keen on sharing stories. For now, I just accept that it's happening. I have a job to do, and I can't let this drive me away. But I can't deny that each night I drive home, my nerves are shot. My hands grip the steering wheel like I'm expecting something to jump out at me from the back seat. I'm hyper-aware of every noise, every shift in the shadows. And it all started with those faint laughs and muffled voices in the corridor. I don't know what else I might encounter if I keep staying late, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out. All I know is that this school isn't the same place I thought it was, and I doubt I'll ever feel completely comfortable here at night again. I just want to finish my work and leave as fast as possible. That's my life now. Watching the clock, listening for sounds I can't explain, and hoping I never see that silhouette in the corner of a classroom again. There's no easy way to say this. I'm scared of the elevator in my own building. I'm 33 years old, I work as an IT analyst, and I come home late almost every night. I'm not a believer in ghosts or anything like that. But now I'm not so sure. My building has 15 floors and I live on the 12th. Most nights I get off work after midnight. That's when things start happening in that cramped metal box. I first noticed something was off about a year ago. It was past midnight and I was heading up after a long shift. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The ride was quiet. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling buzzed. My eyes stung from staring at a computer screen all day, so I leaned against the elevator wall. The floor numbers clicked by. 2, 3, 4, all the way up. Then, right around the 8th floor, the elevator shuddered. The panel flickered. Suddenly, it stopped on the 10th floor. I never pressed 10. The door slid open, revealing an empty hallway. It was dark except for a single light near the exit sign. Nobody got in or out. After a few seconds, the door closed. The elevator continued to the 12th floor like nothing happened. I remember feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off. I figured the system was glitching. I'm a tech guy, and I know that old circuits can act up sometimes. But then it kept happening. Different floors, always empty hallways, always after midnight. At first, it was once a month. Then it became once a week. I even called the caretaker about it. He said, "Yeah, sometimes it does that. It's an old panel. Don't worry about it." He seemed calm, but he had this look in his eye, like he'd seen it all before. I tried not to dwell on it. I had work deadlines, a lot on my mind. But about 6 months ago, I had a terrifying experience. It was around 1 in the morning. I was half asleep on my feet when I pressed the button for my floor. The elevator started climbing. I was counting floors in my head, waiting to get home and crash into bed. Suddenly it jerked. The lights flickered. The cabin creaked, and I felt this weird shift, like the elevator had stopped, but the cables kept straining. I looked at the panel and saw floor 12 lit up. It was trying to open the door, but the door stayed shut for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a laugh. It sounded like a woman, clear as day, somewhere behind me. My stomach dropped. It was so close, like it was right next to my ear. I whipped my head around. The elevator was empty. I kept telling myself it was probably a trick of the building's acoustics. Maybe someone on another floor laughed, and it echoed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of how close it sounded. It wasn't faint or distant. It was crisp. It felt like someone stood behind me, leaned in, and laughed. My hair stood on end. I thought I was going nuts. My heart raced, my mouth went dry. After a few seconds, the door finally opened. The hallway was empty. I didn't see a soul around. I hurried to my apartment, locked the door, and tried to forget about it. But it stuck with me. Over time, I heard rumors from neighbors. People joked about the haunted elevator. Nobody had any solid evidence. But people mentioned hearing noises, or getting stuck, or seeing the doors open to an empty hallway. I asked the caretaker again. He shrugged and said something like, "It's an old system, but I don't mess with it at night." He changed the subject quickly. It was obvious he didn't want to talk about it. I didn't push him, but I started dreading the ride home. One night I was coming back with groceries. It was around 11:45 p.m., not quite midnight, so I thought I'd be safe. I got into the elevator with my bags, pressed 12, and stood there. My eyes were on the doors. I was counting the seconds because at that point I was paranoid. Floor 5 passed, then 6, then 7. The elevator came to a stop at 9. I hadn't pressed 9. The doors slid open, revealing a pitch-black hallway. One of the bulbs on that floor must have been out. There was a flickering light at the far end, but it was so dim that I couldn't see much. I remember the door stayed open longer than usual. I got this overwhelming sense that something was there, just beyond the darkness. The air felt stuffy, even though the ventilation fan hummed overhead. My instincts told me to stay still. I listened for footsteps or voices. Nothing. I shifted the grocery bag from one arm to the other. I could feel sweat rolling down my back. After a long moment, the door closed and the elevator moved again. I exhaled in relief, but my heart thumped in my chest. I took a shower that night, trying to calm my nerves. but I couldn't relax. I kept replaying that open door in my head. A few weeks later, something even worse happened. I got stuck in the elevator around 1:30 a.m. I was exhausted from a big project at work. My neck was stiff and my eyes burned. I just wanted to get home, take a quick shower, and collapse in bed. I pressed 12. The elevator started its climb. At floor 7, it jerked violently, then ground to a halt. The panel went dark. The overhead light stayed on, but everything else died. I tried hitting the emergency button. No response. I tried pressing all the floor buttons, still nothing. I felt a wave of panic. My throat tightened. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I'm not claustrophobic. I've been in tight servers' rooms and small spaces before, but something about that silent elevator car made it hard to breathe. The overhead light flickered once, like it might go out. My chest tightened even more. Then I heard movement above me. It was a soft scuffling sound, like steps or scraping shoes. It moved from one side of the ceiling to the other. I stared up at the hatch, waiting to see if someone was there. The sound paused, then picked up again. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall. I couldn't figure out if it was a maintenance worker or something else. Normally, you'd expect maintenance people to shout, "Hello? Anyone in there?" or something like that. But all I heard was that steady shuffle. After maybe 20 seconds, it stopped. I felt an itch in my palms. My hands were shaking. I pressed the emergency button again and held it. Nothing. All I could do was wait. Suddenly, the panel lit up. The elevator lurched back into motion. The doors opened on the 7th floor hallway. It was empty. The lights were on, but there was no one waiting. I stuck my head out, calling, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. I thought maybe the caretaker had reset something. I got back in and pressed 12 again. The doors closed. Everything seemed normal for the rest of the ride. When I mentioned it to the caretaker the next day, he shrugged again. "Happens sometimes," he said. "Probably an electrical short." He wouldn't look me in the eye, though. I felt like he knew something, but I wasn't about to grill the guy in the lobby. I just nodded and walked away. Every time I saw him after that, he gave me a polite smile, like he was hoping I'd stop asking questions. After that, I tried to change my schedule. I sometimes stayed at a co-worker's place if I knew we'd be working late, but that wasn't always possible. My job demands late hours, and my apartment is still home. I didn't want to live in fear of some stupid elevator. But every single night, I felt dread creeping up my spine when I stood in the lobby, waiting for that car to arrive. Sometimes I took the stairs, but going up 12 flights at 2 a.m. is brutal, especially with a laptop bag and a day's worth of exhaustion. Plus, the stairwell in my building feels eerie after midnight. The fluorescent lights are dim, and there's a stale smell like mop water and old paint. I've done it a few times, but I always end up soaked in sweat and cursing my luck. So I usually keep using the elevator, hoping nothing strange happens. One evening, I was riding up with a neighbor. He's a quiet guy, probably in his 40s. We rarely talk. That night, he nodded at me and pressed his floor button, which was 10. I pressed 12. We both waited. The elevator passed floors 2, 3, and so on. He was scrolling on his phone. I stared at the elevator doors, trying not to look tense. Right before we reached floor 10, the panel flickered, and the elevator stopped at floor 8. The doors opened. No one was there. My neighbor raised an eyebrow. He said, "That's weird." I forced a chuckle like it was no big deal. The doors stayed open a few seconds longer than normal. He actually leaned out and took a quick look down the hallway. He turned back to me and said, "I've heard stories, man." I nodded but didn't say anything. He didn't elaborate. The doors closed, and we went on. I got off at 12, feeling a little better that I wasn't the only one who found this bizarre. The real kicker happened last week. It was 12:30 a.m., and I was dead tired. I'd worked a 10-hour shift. My mind was numb. I got into the elevator and pressed 12, like always. The ride was uneventful until floor 11. Suddenly, the elevator bounced like it hit a snag. I lurched forward, grabbing the handrail. The lights in the car dimmed for a second, then returned to normal. The elevator reached floor 12 and opened. I stepped out, relieved. But as soon as I did, the elevator door closed behind me. I heard a whisper from inside the elevator like a hushed voice. It was so soft I couldn't make out words. I froze in place, my heart pounding. The door was already shut, so I couldn't see inside. It sounded like it was coming from the middle of the empty cabin. My chest tightened again, and I felt this urge to run, but I stood there listening. The whisper lasted maybe 2 seconds, then stopped. I swiped my keycard and practically sprinted to my door. That night I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. I kept thinking about that whisper. I tried to dismiss it as a malfunctioning speaker or some weird mechanical hiss. But it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded human. I could still feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I talked to a couple of co-workers about it the next day. One suggested I record my rides on my phone just to see if I catch anything. I thought about it, but then I decided against it. I wasn't sure I wanted proof. What would I even do with it? Show the caretaker? Bring it to the condo board? They'd probably say the same thing. Old elevator, glitchy wiring, end of story. Or they'd tell me to move out if I didn't like it. And to be honest, if I ever caught a clear voice or face on camera, I'm not sure how I'd handle it. Sometimes ignorance feels safer. I still live here. I still work late. And the weird elevator rides haven't stopped. Once or twice a week, the elevator takes an extra detour. It'll open on a random floor, revealing an empty hallway. Sometimes I swear I hear faint breathing or movement in the elevator car, like someone shifting their weight. I try not to react. I stand still, wait for the door to close, and keep my eyes forward. My heart pounds every time. My palms get sweaty, and there's a heaviness in my stomach that won't go away until I'm safe in my apartment. I've considered moving, but the rent is decent, and I actually like my unit. It's spacious, and the location is close to work. I can't afford a huge increase in rent just because the elevator creeps me out. And part of me wants to believe there's a rational explanation. Maybe there's a short circuit in the control panel, maybe the cables are worn. Maybe there's some weird vent that carries noise. So I try to live with it. I avoid the elevator when I can, but sometimes I'm too tired to haul myself up 12 flights of stairs at 1 a.m. Every night I tell myself that nothing ever actually hurt me in that elevator. There's no real threat, just bizarre noises and uninvited stops. But the laughter, that female laughter I heard so clearly, still chills me. The caretaker's dismissive attitude sticks with me too. He knows more than he's letting on, or at least he suspects something. Other neighbors have told me they've had strange moments in that elevator, but nobody wants to make a big deal out of it. They just want to get to their floors and go to sleep. So that's my story. I'm a grown man, and I'm freaked out by my own elevator. It's ridiculous, but it's my reality. Every time I step into that metal box after midnight, my heart rate goes up. I brace myself for a random stop, or a flicker of the lights, or a disembodied whisper. It feels like a twisted routine at this point. Work late, come home, face the elevator, wait to see if it'll do something strange, and then try to forget it when I finally step into my apartment. I wish I had some big explanation or a fix for it, but I don't. I just deal with it day by day, or rather, night by night. I can't say I've gotten used to it, but I can't say I'm ready to move out either. I don't know if the elevator is actually haunted or if there's some technical issue that nobody wants to fix. All I know is that I've heard things that shouldn't be there, and I've ended up on floors I never pressed. I've felt the car shake and stop, and I've been stuck with footsteps over my head. Whatever's happening in my building, it's real enough to keep me on edge. But life goes on. I have to pay my bills, keep my job, and get home somehow. And that means stepping into that elevator again and again after midnight. Every time I hold my breath and hope it just goes straight to 12 without any surprises. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And that's the worst part. I never know which ride will be the quiet one. I still remember the first time those lights made me question my own eyes. I was on my usual late-night drive to visit my mother's farm, following the same rural road I'd taken countless times. I was tired, but I wasn't delirious. I saw something strange on the side of the road, a small light hovering about 3 feet off the ground. It looked like a firefly if fireflies were the size of golf balls and stayed steady instead of flickering. It vanished when I drove past it. My heart pounded for the rest of the drive. I didn't mention it to anyone right away because I thought it could have been a reflection on my windshield. Maybe a tiny glare from a roadside marker, but the feeling I got, like someone was watching me, didn't go away. My hands felt clammy on the wheel and my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. All I saw behind me was dark pavement, no headlights, no silhouette, just emptiness. After that first experience, I started paying more attention. For a while, I saw nothing unusual. 2 weeks passed, and I convinced myself it was just my imagination. The farmland is quiet at night. There are no streetlights, and the glow from my car's headlights is the only illumination. I kept the radio on to break the silence. Usually I'd listen to some late-night talk show or whatever music I found, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. On the third week I saw another light. It was off in a distant field on my left. I slowed down for a moment just to see if it was an animal's eyes, or maybe the reflection of a distant house light. It stayed there, bobbing slightly, but it never moved closer. I couldn't see any shape around it. It was just a bright pinpoint in the dark. I felt a shiver run across my shoulders, and I tapped the gas pedal without thinking. My car jerked forward. The light stayed behind. By the time I reached my mother's place, my stomach felt knotted up. She asked if I was okay. I just said I was tired. By the 5th week, the lights started showing up more often. Sometimes it was just one. Other times I saw 2 or 3 at once. They floated near fence lines, hovered above ditches, and even crossed the road behind me. I tried to convince myself they were motorcycle headlights from far away, but I never heard an engine. I never saw any sign of an actual bike. Once I stopped the car, turned off the radio, and rolled down the window. I heard nothing, not even insects. Just a dead quiet that made me realize how isolated I was at that hour. My throat felt tight, and my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. After a few seconds, the lights went out. I told a couple of friends about it. They laughed it off or said it was probably swamp gas or reflection from farm equipment. One friend offered to come along for a ride. I took him with me the next week. We drove the same route at the same time, but the lights never appeared. I felt a combination of relief and frustration. I wanted someone else to see them, to confirm I wasn't losing my grip on reality. But that night, the field stayed dark. My friend teased me about it for days. I got tired of trying to explain. I decided to record the drive on my phone. I mounted it on the dashboard and hit record during the darkest stretch of road. When I finally saw a light appear on the right side, my heart started pounding again. It looked like it was about 10 yards off the pavement, drifting parallel to my car. I spoke out loud, describing what I was seeing, hoping the phone would pick it up. I slowed down to a crawl, trying to keep the light in frame. Then it vanished. I pulled over. My hands trembled when I picked up my phone to check the footage. There was nothing there. The recording showed the empty road. No bright spot, no strange glow. My voice was on the audio track, describing something that didn't show up. My gut twisted, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment, even though I was alone in the car. That's when I decided something else was going on. It wasn't a normal phenomenon. It showed up when I was alone, vanished when anyone else was around, and never left any trace on video. It had to be more than just a trick of the light. It had an awareness. Each time I saw it, I felt it watching me, not just hovering randomly. One night I thought I was being brave, or maybe stupid, and I pulled over when I saw 2 lights out in a field. They were about 50 yards away, lined up at about the same height. I grabbed my flashlight from under the seat and got out of the car. The air was cool, and I could smell damp grass. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my neck. I walked to the fence line, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The lights didn't move. They glowed like bright beads in the distance. My mouth went dry and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. I took one step over the ditch. My foot sank into the soft mud, and my ankle twisted a little. I hissed in pain but kept going. I raised the flashlight and pointed it toward the lights. Then, without any warning, they blinked out. The field turned pitch black. I cursed under my breath and spun around, shining my light everywhere. I didn't see anything. No animals, no person, no machines. I stumbled back to the car and pulled out of there fast. My heart pounded for the rest of the drive. By the time I got to my mother's place, my shirt was damp with sweat and my hands felt shaky. When I went inside, Mom asked if something was wrong. She said my face looked pale. I said I just needed some water and a few minutes to calm down. I sat at the kitchen table, rubbing my temples. The overhead light felt harsh and my eyes were dry. She set a glass of water in front of me. I drank it in one go. She tried to ask me again what was wrong, but I couldn't form a proper explanation. I just shook my head and told her not to worry. Every week it got worse. The lights got closer to the road. Sometimes they floated just a few feet from my car. I could see them from the corner of my eye when I looked at the side mirrors. One time I glanced out the driver's side window and saw a single light pacing me. It kept speed with my car for about 10 seconds, then shot off into the dark. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might vomit. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focusing on the feeling of the steering wheel under my palms. Around that time, I stopped sleeping well. I'd find myself thinking about those drives, anticipating the lights. My pulse would race and I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling in my bedroom. It felt like every shift of darkness in that room might bring one of those glowing orbs right inside my house. It never happened, but I kept expecting it. I made another attempt to show someone the lights. I brought my cousin, who's usually up for anything, on the drive. He was excited and had his phone ready to record. We spent the entire 30-minute trip with our eyes peeled on the fields. Not one light showed up. He joked that maybe I needed to be alone for the lights to come out. The joke stung, but he was right. I felt that uneasy twist in my stomach again. On the next trip, the lights returned. They appeared sooner than usual, just after I left the main highway. They were bright, maybe the size of tennis balls this time, and I counted 3 of them in front of me. I thought they might be blocking the road. I slowed down to a near stop. The road was empty except for my car. My headlights shone on the asphalt and I could see the gravel shoulders on each side. The orbs floated about 6 feet off the ground, well above my headlight's beam. I felt a jolt of fear, like a surge of cold in my veins. The orbs stayed there for a few seconds, then scattered in different directions. I gunned the gas, wanting to get as far as possible from that spot. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. I muttered to myself, "What are you?" over and over. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave that whole area forever, but I had to see my mother. I couldn't ignore my responsibilities. As I continued, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting the lights to follow me. I saw nothing. By the time I arrived at the farm, my hands were stiff from gripping the wheel so tightly. I started dreading these trips more than I could handle. Each time I drove at night, I felt my chest tighten when I passed the sign for the rural route. My breath would quicken, and my palms would sweat. Sometimes I even considered pulling over at a rest stop and waiting until morning. But Mom depended on my visits. She couldn't manage all her errands alone, and I needed to help her with groceries and some chores. So, I kept going. One night, the tension reached a new level. About halfway down the dark stretch, I saw 4 lights. They were in the middle of the road, spaced out in pairs like 2 sets of eyes. I stopped the car entirely. My heart hammered, and I could hear the rush of blood in my ears. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and rolled down the window just enough to see if there was any sound. It was silent except for the soft hum of my engine. I sat there for about 15 seconds, debating if I should move forward or reverse. The lights didn't move. They hovered in place, steady and bright. I felt my thighs tremble against the seat. My mouth was dry and my arms felt cold. Finally, I pressed the gas lightly, creeping forward. The lights flickered out. I let out a shaky breath and kept driving. When I checked the recording later, it showed darkness. I could hear my own breathing and the hum of the engine, but there were no lights on the screen. I watched the video 5 times. Nothing. It made my stomach churn. Why wouldn't it show up on camera? On my most recent trip, the tension got worse. I drove at my usual late hour, trying to keep my mind focused on the road. About a mile into the rural route, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single light floated on the right shoulder, maybe 2 feet off the ground. I slowed down without even thinking. As I passed, I turned my head slightly, keeping my eyes on the orb. It was about the size of a baseball, perfectly round, shining like a small lamp. My heart thumped and my chest felt tight. Then I noticed a second orb beside it. They both stayed still, directly pointed at my car. I had this overwhelming sense that something was looking straight at me, and I felt a hot flush spread through my body. I couldn't breathe right. My lungs felt strained and my vision blurred for a second. The orbs flicked out. The darkness rushed in around me, and I jerked the wheel, almost going off the road. I managed to straighten out before I hit the ditch. I kept my foot on the gas until I reached my mother's driveway. I slammed on the brakes, got out, and leaned against my car, breathing hard. The night air felt cold against my sweaty skin. My heart pounded so loud I couldn't hear much else. After a minute, I went inside. Mom was sleeping. I didn't want to wake her. I sat in the living room with the lights on, staring at the clock and waiting for my heartbeat to calm down. Now, each time I plan to drive there, I get a knot in my stomach that doesn't fade until the trip is over. I keep thinking about the lights. They're coming closer. They're crossing the road more often. They're hovering near my car windows. They vanish the moment I slow down or try to film them. It's like they're messing with me, staying just out of reach. I can't prove they exist to anyone else. I feel more isolated every week. I have to keep going. My mother needs me and I can't just stop visiting her. But each time I get behind the wheel at night, I feel my body tense up. I grip the steering wheel until my hands hurt. I watch every inch of the darkness, waiting for those orbs to appear again. And they always do, drifting in and out of sight, reminding me that I'm not alone out there. I don't know what they are or why they're following me, but I can't shake the feeling that they're getting bolder. They feel intelligent, like they're studying my reactions. That's all I can say. I see those lights each time I drive to the farm alone. I don't have an explanation, and I can't record any evidence. I don't think anyone would believe me if I tried to explain it in more detail. All I know is that every trip makes my heart race, and every trip makes me wonder if something will finally step out from the darkness and show me what those lights really are. Until that happens, I'll keep driving, keeping my eyes on the road and my foot ready on the gas. And every single time, those lights will be out there, waiting. I never expected my grandfather's old plane to fill my nights with grinding noises and uneasy sweat. I inherited his tools when I turned 41, a few months after he passed away. I've been a professional carpenter for almost 2 decades, but I owe everything I know to him. He taught me how to measure angles by feel, how to sense the grain of the wood under my fingertips, and how to spot a warped board from across the room. When I got his plane, I felt proud to have it on my workbench. I had no idea it would keep me awake with the unsettling sound of wood being shaved after hours. I remember the first night I heard that noise. It was around midnight. I was half asleep in the small office attached to my workshop. I'd stayed late to finish a table for a client. My back hurt, and my eyes felt heavy. Just before drifting off on my chair, I heard a sharp scraping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind brushing a tree branch against the metal siding. But I recognized the rhythm. It sounded exactly like a plane running over a board, slow and steady. 1, 2, 3 strokes in a row, pause, then another set of strokes. My heart pounded. My legs trembled. I looked around and realized the plane was on my main bench in the shop area. No one else was there. I got up, fumbled for the switch, and turned on the overhead lights in the shop. The scraping sound stopped. The plane was still on the bench, right where I'd left it. I walked over, touched it, picked it up, and felt nothing strange. But I saw fresh curls of wood on the bench surface, those thin, almost translucent shavings that come from a properly sharpened blade. I couldn't figure out where those shavings came from. There wasn't a single board on the bench. My breathing was fast and my palms felt clammy. My first thought was that maybe someone had broken in. I checked the doors. They were locked. The windows were intact. There was no sign of forced entry. I even looked in the corners of the shop, behind cabinets, under the big table saw. Nobody was there. I didn't feel safe, but I didn't have a better explanation. I swept up the shavings, put them in a trash bin, and left the plane on a side shelf. Then I locked the plane in a small tool cabinet just to be sure. After that, I grabbed my things and headed home, my stomach twisted in knots. The next morning, I arrived early, hoping I'd just imagined everything. I opened the cabinet and took out the plane. The plane was exactly where I left it, but I found another small pile of shavings on the cabinet shelf. My throat felt dry. That meant something happened after I left. I took a closer look at the blade. It looked freshly used, with a bit of dust stuck to the edge. I wiped it off, feeling a chill on the back of my neck. I set the plane aside and decided to keep it on a different bench. The rest of the day I stayed busy building a custom dresser, trying to ignore the weird feeling that something was off. A couple nights later, I stayed late again to finish some sanding work. I had turned off most of the lights except the one over my sanding station. At around 11 p.m, I heard that scraping again. This time it was louder. My chest felt tight. My hands trembled and I almost dropped the orbital sander. I looked toward the main bench and didn't see anything unusual, but the scraping sound kept going. It was steady, like someone pushing that plane across a piece of lumber. I walked closer, feeling my heart hammering inside my chest. My forehead felt damp with sweat. I flipped on the overhead lights. The noise stopped instantly, no sign of movement. The plane sat there, blade facing the wall. I stood there for a good minute, trying to steady my breathing, when I saw a faint shape in the back of the shop. It was in the corner by an old shelf where my grandfather used to keep leftover wood scraps. I froze. It was shaped like a man, hunched a bit, arms at his side. I took a few slow steps forward, and it vanished behind the shelf. My scalp tingled, and I felt a chill spread through my shoulders. I didn't want to go closer, but I had to see. I moved behind the shelf. It was empty. No one was hiding there. I felt a tingling in my hands, like my nerves were on full alert. The air smelled dusty, like old sawdust and stale sweat. Over the next few weeks, I kept finding fresh wood shavings. Sometimes I found them scattered on the floor near the tool cabinet. Sometimes they were on the bench near the plane. I also started noticing finished details on projects that I hadn't done myself. One morning I came in and discovered a small wooden box that I used for storing nails had been polished and buffed to a smooth sheen. I had never done that. I had only built the box from scrap pine. There was no reason for me to polish it. But there it was, shining under the fluorescent light. I didn't know how to react. I felt invaded, like someone was in my personal space, messing with my projects. One night I heard a soft tapping sound. It was around 2 a.m. I was there late again, trying to finish a project for a demanding client. At first I thought it was just the sound of my neighbor's car engine outside, but it kept going, evenly spaced. I followed it, and it led me to the back corner near the leftover wood pile. The tapping grew louder as I approached, then stopped when I was 2 feet away. My chest felt heavy. I clenched my fists, wondering if I would see that figure again. The space was empty. Nothing moved. But I noticed a faint creaking from the rafters above, like someone shifting weight on an old beam. I couldn't sleep properly anymore. My mind was constantly on edge. I kept remembering the times my grandfather would scold me if I rushed through a project or used cheap materials. He was strict about quality. He believed every piece of wood deserved respect. I started thinking maybe he was somehow still here, watching me work, checking if I did things the way he taught me. I felt a surge of guilt. Lately, I'd been cutting corners on some smaller jobs. I'd buy cheaper plywood or skip a final sanding pass to save time. Maybe he didn't approve. One evening, I decided to talk out loud. I felt silly doing it, but I needed to address whatever was happening. I stood next to the plane on the main bench. I looked around, my voice shaky, and said, "Grandpa, if you're here, I don't mean any disrespect. I'm just trying to keep the business going." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I heard nothing else. Then I felt a cold breeze touch my neck. It was odd because I had no windows open and the door was closed. The temperature dropped a few degrees and I felt goosebumps on my arms. My stomach tightened. I thought I was either losing my mind or experiencing something real. That same night I decided not to leave the plane on the bench. I locked it in a wooden toolbox with a latch. I placed the toolbox behind some large cabinets thinking that might block whatever force was causing these incidents. I felt nervous and a bit frustrated. I went home and tried to sleep, but my dreams were restless. When I came back in the morning, I found the toolbox on the bench. The latch was undone and the plane was sitting on top of the box. There were new shavings around it. My heart pounded, and I felt sweat trickle down my back. I felt trapped in my own workshop, like I had no control over this strange presence. Another day, I swore I saw that shape again. It stood by the corner, near the leftover lumber rack. This time, I saw more detail. It looked like an older man, tall, with a rigid posture. The face was shadowed, but I recognized the outline of the hair and the stance. It reminded me of my grandfather standing there, arms crossed, watching me like he used to do when I was a teenager learning the craft. I felt my mouth go dry and I couldn't move. I noticed the expression on that face, or at least the way the head was tilted. It didn't look kind or soft. It felt judgmental, like it was evaluating me and finding me lacking. I tried to call out, but my throat felt tight. I managed a weak, "Grandpa?" The figure remained still for a moment. Then it turned and faded behind the lumber rack. I ran over and found nothing but old scraps of wood and cobwebs. I stood there breathing hard, feeling my heart thump in my ears. My hands shook and my legs felt weak. I had the urge to leave the workshop right then, but I had orders to complete, so I stayed. My phone showed it was only 7 p.m. I knew I had hours of work ahead. One morning, I walked in to find a small table I was building fully assembled and polished. I had only gotten as far as cutting the pieces and gluing part of the frame. But now the table was complete with a smooth finish, like someone had taken the time to sand and seal it overnight. I touched the surface and it felt cold, like the polish hadn't fully dried. I felt a deep wave of unease. My head spun with questions. Who was doing this work? Why did it look so perfect, almost like it was done by a skilled hand? I couldn't tell if I was thankful for the help or terrified that I was being overshadowed by this spirit. At times, I tried ignoring it. I tried going about my business, pretending nothing strange was happening. But at night, the sounds continued. The scraping of the plane, the tapping near the woodpile, the occasional rattling of the toolbox. I started losing clients because my nerves were shot, and I couldn't keep a consistent schedule. I spent more time investigating noises and feeling paranoid than I did focusing on my craft. My lower back hurt all the time, and I felt constant tension in my shoulders. I even considered selling the plane or tossing it in the dumpster, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was my grandfather's. It felt wrong to throw away his favorite tool. One afternoon, I placed the plane on my bench and studied it. I ran my hand over the worn handle. The blade still looked sharp. I remembered the way he used to hold it, the way he'd press his palm against it, guiding it along the wood grain. I felt a tightness in my chest. I could almost hear his voice telling me to slow down, not to rush the job. I set it aside and looked around the shop. Everything was in its place. Tools hanging on the pegboard, lumber stacked neatly. But I didn't feel at ease. I knew that once the lights were off and the sun went down, something else might happen. My final straw came a few nights ago. I was finishing a large dining table for a client who wanted a rustic finish. I stayed until 1 a.m., applying the final stain. I had the radio on low volume to keep myself company. The plane was sitting on the bench again because I had used it earlier for some final smoothing. Suddenly, the radio cut to static. The overhead lights flickered. My skin prickled, and a cold wave swept through the room. I froze, brush in hand. Then behind me I heard heavy footsteps. They were slow, measured, like someone walking in work boots. I spun around, and I saw him. My grandfather's shape stood by the plane. The figure lifted an arm and seemed to point at the table I was working on. My breath came out in short gasps. I felt a deep, sharp fear in my gut. My legs locked in place. The figure shifted, and the face turned toward me. It looked stern, the way my grandfather looked when he thought I was being careless. I stammered, "I'm doing my best." My voice sounded small, echoing in the empty workshop. The lights flickered again, and the figure vanished. The radio came back to its normal station and the overhead lights steadied. I felt my eyes burning with tears. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Now, I'm here, telling this story because I don't know what else to do. Every night the noises come back. I find new evidence of work done on pieces I haven't touched. The plane never stays in storage. It always turns up on the bench, blade ready, shavings scattered around. I'm convinced it's my grandfather's spirit lingering in this place, trying to tell me something. I suspect he disapproves of my shortcuts, my lack of care in some details. He taught me better than that. I wonder if he'll ever let go, or if I'll have to change my ways for him to find peace. For now, I keep showing up to work. I haven't told my clients or my friends because they'd think I'm losing my mind. I've started taking more time on each project. I've upgraded some of my materials. I make sure to smooth every edge, to measure everything twice, to choose good lumber. I've noticed fewer nighttime incidents when I work to the standard he taught me. But some nights the scraping still happens. I still see that shape in the corner, staring, judging. My palms get sweaty just thinking about it. I wish I could talk to him directly, to tell him I'm sorry for falling short. But all I can do is keep building, keep sanding, and keep an eye on that old plane. It's become a constant reminder that he's not ready to leave me alone, and I'm not sure if I want him to. Even though it scares me, I respect the craftsmanship he passed down. This is my life now. I'm a 41-year-old carpenter who can't spend a single night in his own workshop without hearing the ghostly scrape of a plane blade. Every morning I wonder what I'll find. A finished project I didn't work on, another pile of shavings in a locked cabinet, a shape in the corner watching with a frown on its face. I don't have the answers, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I only know that the sound of that plane has become part of my nights, and I'm afraid it won't stop until I honor the lessons my grandfather tried so hard to drill into me. I just hope I can handle it without completely losing my mind. I noticed him the first time when I was shelving an old set of ledgers in a dim corner of the library. I saw a figure in a dark coat at the far end of the aisle, just standing there. It was closing time. No visitors were supposed to be around. I called out, but he didn't react. I walked closer, but by the time I reached that end, he was gone. That moment stuck with me. I had no explanation for how he could vanish so quietly. It started me down a path I never expected. My name is Nathan. I'm 32 years old, and I volunteer a few nights a week at this old library. The building has been around since 1910. I help catalog books, reorganize shelves, and sort documents. I do it because I love old places and old stories. My day job isn't exciting. I fix computer systems for a small law firm, but the library feels like a different world. Quiet, packed with history, and full of hidden rooms and dusty corners. I like staying late. Usually, the librarians lock up around 8 p.m., and I have permission to stay until around 10 p.m. if I want. Sometimes the security guard does his rounds while I work, and we chat. But after that first time I saw the man in the dark coat, I realized the security guard had seen him too. One night, when I brought it up, he shrugged and told me he'd noticed a guy like that from time to time. The guard said the person never caused trouble, never stole anything, never spoke. He just walked down an aisle or stood near a shelf, then disappeared. I thought maybe there was a second exit I didn't know about, or a corridor that twisted somewhere. The building has additions from the 1940s and the 1960s, so sometimes the floor plan is confusing, but I kept an eye out. I started walking around with a flashlight if I stayed past closing. The overhead lights are good in the main sections, but some corners are dim and the old bulbs flicker. One night, I decided to finish reorganizing a set of historical documents. They were in the reference room. These documents are large books, almost like ledgers, detailing records from the city's founding era. Lots of genealogies, property lines, zoning maps, that kind of stuff. The library keeps them under lock and key because they're fragile. The reference librarian gave me permission to work on them as long as I used gloves and handled them carefully. At around 9:30 p.m., the library was empty except for me and the security guard. I had a cart with a bunch of these ledgers. I put them on the long wooden table in the reference room. The air there always smells like old paper and faint mildew. The overhead lamps buzz softly. I was checking the ledgers off in an inventory sheet. Then I heard something. It sounded like a light scrape, like a shoe against the floor. I looked up and saw a shadow move near the end of the room. The door was open, but I couldn't see any shape. I got up, walked to the doorway, and looked down the corridor. Nothing there. My heart was pounding. I couldn't explain why I felt uneasy. Maybe it was just the building settling. I tried to focus on the ledgers again. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. I turned and saw him at the end of the corridor. He was wearing that dark coat, and his hat was tilted forward, covering his face. I stood up straight. The hair on my arms stood on end. My hands got sweaty. I thought about calling the guard, but something kept me in place. I wanted to see what this figure would do. I stepped forward. He didn't move at all. I felt a tingling in my stomach, like I shouldn't be seeing him. I turned my head for just a second to grab my flashlight off the table. When I looked back, he was gone. This time, I walked all the way down the corridor. My footsteps echoed on the hard floor. The corridor ended near a staff-only door that was locked. There was no sign of him. I reported it to the guard, who just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's him. Don't worry about it. He doesn't do anything." The guard spoke as though this was completely normal. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I kept questioning whether it was some trick of the lighting or a homeless person sneaking in. But if it was a real person, he was ridiculously fast and quiet. Over the following weeks, I tried to ignore it. Whenever I stayed late, I worked with the overhead lights as bright as possible. I brought headphones sometimes to distract myself, but the place can be creepy, and I wanted to stay alert. I managed to catch glimpses of him a few times, always at a distance, never up close. He never talked. He never touched anything, at least that I saw. Yet the guard told me that sometimes books were found open or out of place in odd corners. He said it might be the same person, or maybe just visitors who forgot to reshelve something. Still, it felt connected to this strange figure. The library has these old logs and files in the basement archives, and I volunteered to go through them on a Wednesday night. This was part of a bigger project to digitize everything, so I needed to scan documents, record them, and label them in a spreadsheet. These archives smell even mustier than the reference room. The walls have metal shelves stacked with boxes, and the lighting is weak. There's a single overhead bulb every 15 feet, so large sections of the aisles are shadowy. I spent hours there, scanning and typing. Around 11 p.m., my eyes got tired. I decided to walk upstairs, grab a coffee from the machine, and stretch my legs. When I got upstairs, the hallway leading to the staff lounge was silent. The security guard sometimes takes breaks around that time, so I assumed he was on his usual round. When I opened the lounge door, the lights were off. I flipped them on, got my coffee, and went back into the hallway. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and steady, down near the historical archives room. I stepped toward the sound. I kept my coffee in one hand and braced my other hand on the wall. The footsteps stopped. I looked around the corner, but the corridor was empty. I kept walking, trying to be quiet. Then I saw him. He was standing about 15 feet away from me, near the old wooden door that leads to a small reading nook. His hat was still covering his face. He stood perfectly still, as if he was waiting for me. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to speak, but no words came. All I managed was a whispered, "Hey," that barely came out. He didn't respond. I took a step forward. Then he took a step back. That's when I noticed something strange. There was this old leather-bound book in his hand. The cover looked worn and dusty. I recognized it from the archives. I'm pretty sure it was a record book from the early 1900s. I tried asking him if he needed help or if he was looking for something. Silence. He turned slightly and walked around the corner. I rushed after him, but when I reached that corner, he was gone. There was no door or hallway there, just a straight path to another locked storage area. I used my key on the door, thinking maybe he'd slipped inside, but the room was dark and empty. My entire body felt shaky. I didn't know what to do. I put my ear against the door, trying to hear if maybe he was hiding. Nothing. I went back to the main corridor and found the guard. I told him everything, including the detail about the old book. He shrugged, said he hadn't seen anybody recently, and suggested I take it easy. He made a casual joke that I might be seeing things after too many hours in the archives. I didn't feel like joking. Over the next few nights, I couldn't shake the anxiety. Every time I passed a dark corner, I expected to see that figure. I asked some of the librarians about the old record books. Most of them said that Set was kept under lock and key. It was part of the city's historical archive. They contained a lot of property records, but also some old correspondence and personal diaries from prominent families. The library director had mentioned these materials were once misfiled or partially lost. Something about them was never fully organized. One Friday night, I decided to stay later than usual. I needed to finish an inventory in the main hall. The security guard told me I could stay, but I had to make sure to lock up properly. He left at midnight, which was unusual, because he normally does a shift until morning. Maybe there was some staffing issue. In any case, I was alone. The silence felt heavier without the guard's presence. I finished the inventory around 12:30 a.m., but I wasn't satisfied. My curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if I could find that old leather-bound book. I went down to the archives, into the dusty aisles, scanning shelves with my flashlight. The floor creaked under my feet. I found a section labeled 1905-1912 City Ledgers. I started searching for anything that looked like the book I'd seen in the figure's hand. After 20 minutes, I hadn't found it. My shoulders were tense. My neck hurt from looking side to side so often, checking if he was nearby. I looked behind me every few seconds. The entire place felt off, like the air was thicker than usual. Then I saw him again. He was at the end of the aisle, about 20 feet away, standing in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it in his direction. The light barely reached him. It was enough for me to see his coat and hat. I still couldn't see his face. I called out, louder this time, telling him I just wanted to talk. No answer. He lifted his arm and pointed toward a shelf. I froze. I could see his gloved hand pointing at a specific row of books. My mind was racing. Then, just as before, he vanished in an instant. I sprinted down the aisle, pointing my flashlight at every shelf. There was no one there. But I did see a thick, dusty volume partially pulled out from the shelf. It looked old and worn. The label on the spine matched the 1908 city records. I slid the book off the shelf and placed it on a small table nearby. It felt heavier than it looked. When I set it down, dust flew off the cover. I opened the book and flipped through the pages. Most of it was property listings, land purchases, and legal documents. Near the end, there were letters and personal notes inserted, possibly from the families who owned property back then. They were old, some handwritten, some typed. I scanned them quickly, but none stood out except for one letter that mentioned a dispute at the library's opening. It said something about missing funds and confusion over a donation. I had no idea if it mattered. That's when I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned around and saw another book lying on the floor. It was a different ledger, also from around 1909. It was open, and the pages were slightly crumpled. I picked it up and glanced through it. My hands were shaking. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The pages were covered in lists of donors and amounts. I noticed that someone had circled a particular name in pencil, but I couldn't read it clearly. The handwriting was old-fashioned and faint. I felt like someone was watching me again. I looked around, but no one was there. My throat was dry. I shut the book and placed it on the table. My eyes stung from staying awake so late, but I couldn't just leave. The feeling in my gut told me that whoever this figure was, he didn't want me digging too deep, or maybe he was trying to show me something. Either way, I sensed a presence in those aisles, like a pressure behind me, pushing me to hurry up and leave. I packed up the books, decided to gather them properly and leave them on the archivist's desk upstairs. I didn't want to stay in that basement any longer. My steps felt heavy as I climbed the stairs. When I got to the main floor, I noticed the lights were off. I thought I'd left them on. My nerves were raw. I tried not to think about it. I turned them back on and walked across the main hall to the reference room. Every shadow felt like it was moving. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I put the books on the desk, took one more look at the pages, and realized I was too tired to make sense of them. I decided to lock up and go home. As I walked to the front entrance, I glanced toward the far end of the main hall. In the last flicker of light from the overhead lamps, I saw him again. The man in the dark coat stood there. I felt my face go cold. My hands shook. He was motionless. His head was down, hat brim covering his features. I took a step forward, but the lights flickered and he vanished into the darkness. I forced myself to keep walking. I exited the building and locked the door behind me. Outside, the cool night air hit my face. My body felt stiff. My mind was racing, but I also felt relieved to be out of there. When I reached my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him on the sidewalk. No one was there. I got in, locked the doors, and drove home. Now every time I come back, I wonder if he's waiting for me in those aisles. I keep telling myself that I'll figure out what's in those records, that maybe it explains who he is or why he lurks in the library. But the more I see him, the more I suspect he doesn't want me digging any further. He appears just long enough to unnerve me, then disappears without a trace. I can't explain it. I can't prove it. But I know I'm not imagining it. I can't stop volunteering. I'm drawn to that building and its history. Yet every late shift I feel that knot in my stomach. I catch movement in my peripheral vision, and I tense up, expecting to see him. Sometimes I do see him for a split second. Other times I just hear the soft click of footsteps on the old floors. It's a strange dance. Him staying out of reach, and me trying to figure out if I should keep searching through those ancient ledgers. I don't tell many people about it because they'd think I'm paranoid. The guard just shrugs. The librarians say old buildings have their quirks, but deep down, I know something else is going on here. I don't know who that man is, or why he keeps showing up. All I know is that he's there in the quiet corridors reminding me that some parts of the past refuse to stay hidden. And every time I walk through the library's doors, I feel his presence, and I can't escape the sense that I'm getting closer to something he doesn't want me to see. I still remember the first time the phone rang that late. It was around 2:15 a.m. The firehouse was quiet, and I was alone in the small station lobby. I was half asleep, leaning back in a creaky office chair, when the shrill ring startled me. I jumped up, heart racing, and grabbed the receiver. All I heard was a faint static crackle and a rasp of someone breathing on the other end. I kept saying, "Hello?" But there was no real response. It was just that heavy, uneven breathing. Then the line went dead. I checked the caller ID. It showed some random string of digits, nothing like the usual local numbers. I hung up and told myself it was probably a prank. But that didn't make the uneasy feeling go away. I've been a volunteer firefighter in this small town for about 5 years now. I take overnight shifts sometimes because we're short-staffed, and I don't mind the solitude. Usually, the nights are slow. We might get 1 or 2 calls if there's a medical emergency or a late-night car crash on the main highway. Most nights I spend my time catching up on maintenance logs, cleaning gear, and reviewing procedures. But after that first weird call, things started happening more often. The calls came in at random times past midnight, usually between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Every single time, the caller ID showed a strange combination of numbers, something I'd never seen before. The next time it happened, I picked up the phone on the first ring. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I could hear the same static, the same raspy breathing. I kept my voice calm and said, "This is the volunteer fire department. Do you have an emergency?" Then, after maybe 5 seconds of dead air, I heard a voice. It was quiet, like someone was whispering right against the mouthpiece. They said, "Help me. Don't leave me here." Their voice cracked, and then the line went silent. I said, "Hello? Where are you? Can you hear me?" Nothing, just the click of the call ending. I looked at the caller ID again. Same kind of random sequence, no recognizable format. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. The voice didn't sound like a joke. It sounded desperate. Later that same week, it happened again. This time, the voice said something about an address. It was so faint I almost missed it. I heard a set of numbers and a street name. My stomach twisted because I recognized the street name, but it didn't exist in our modern layout anymore. It was an older name, something that had been changed decades ago. I grabbed a pen and scribbled down what I thought I heard. 43 East Quarter. I had no idea what that meant. I'd never seen anything like East Quarter on any current town map. After that call, I spent part of my shift rummaging through old binders in a dusty back room. We have some historical documents about the town's older street names and property lines. I found a section that showed a listing for a quarter street or quarter road from about 40 years ago. According to that binder, that stretch of land had been set aside and then abandoned after a severe fire. It was never redeveloped. The text didn't go into detail, but it mentioned significant damage. The area was eventually cleared, and the official street name was removed from updated city plans. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. There was something about the phone calls mentioning that old address that rattled me. I didn't say a word to my fellow volunteers at first. I thought they'd think I was paranoid or reading too much into some random prank. But the calls didn't stop. Every time I was on the overnight shift, the phone would ring at least once. If I didn't pick up on the first ring, it would keep ringing over and over until I answered. A few nights later, around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang again. This time I pressed the receiver tight against my ear. I said, "Volunteer fire department, what's your emergency?" The static hissed. Then I heard that same shaky voice whisper, "Please, it's so hot, can't get out, help." My heart sank. I asked, "What's your address?" The voice said, 43 East Quarter. Then it sounded like scraping in the background, something metallic maybe. Then the call ended abruptly. I felt my skin break out in goosebumps. I had the address. Or at least that's what the caller insisted it was. Right after I hung up, I tried calling the number back. Of course, it didn't connect to anything. It was like a ghost number. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that maybe someone was messing around, but the voice didn't sound playful. I decided to do some deeper digging. I looked through more official records, 911 call logs, old building permits, and local newspaper clippings we keep in a back cabinet. That's when I found something that referenced a property with a similar address, a vacant lot where a serious fire broke out a long time ago, back when the street was known as Quarter. After that incident, the place was pretty much left alone. The city eventually renamed some nearby roads, repurposed others, but never built anything on that specific plot again. I went back to the station's garage and grabbed one of the older area maps. It was from before the rename. I laid it on a table under the harsh fluorescent lights. According to that old map, 43 East Quarter would now be somewhere near the corner of Harper and Vine. But there's nothing there now except an overgrown lot behind a rusted chain-link fence. I remembered driving by that corner. It always looked deserted, just a patch of tall weeds and cracked asphalt. Nobody ever built there again. That next shift, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I heard the phone ring for regular business, I felt a jolt in my chest, waiting for that strange static. Around 2:45 a.m., sure enough, the phone rang again. I picked it up, my hand shaking a bit. The voice was even more urgent than before. They were breathing fast, like they were coughing. I could hear short, ragged breaths. They said something like, "It's happening. Can't breathe. Come now." Then the line cut out. I felt my mouth go dry. My instincts as a firefighter kicked in. I thought, even if this is a prank, I can't ignore a request for help. I wrote a quick note, pinned it on the message board for the others, and grabbed my gear. I hopped into one of our smaller rescue trucks because I didn't want to wake the entire station for something that might be nothing. I figured I'd do a quick drive-by, see if anything was going on, and come back. It was a chilly night. The roads were deserted. I drove with the windows cracked to stay alert. The radio was silent. The only sounds were the hum of the truck's engine and my own breath. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. When I got to the intersection of Harper and Vine, I pulled over to the curb. I left the headlights on, shining over that empty, fenced lot. I got out and stood by the fence. All I saw was debris, weeds, and a few broken pieces of concrete. The moonlight made everything look pale and cold. The wind blew through the tall grass, creating a soft rustling sound. There was no sign of fire, no glow of flames, no smell of smoke. Everything was silent, except for the night wind. I stood there for a minute, scanning the area. I felt my heart thumping. Part of me expected to see someone wave for help, or to see a flicker of light in the darkness. But there was nothing. I pointed my flashlight through the chain-link fence, sweeping it across the ground. Just broken glass, a couple of rusted metal barrels, old scraps of wood. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there recently. After about 10 minutes, I got back in the truck and radioed the station to let them know it was all clear. On the drive back, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling, like someone was watching me. When I got back, I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but my mind kept drifting. Night after night, the pattern repeated. The calls came in around the same time, always from that scrambled number. The voice begged for help, sometimes coughing, sometimes crying. At one point, I heard a faint crackling in the background, almost like the sound of embers. One night, the voice said, "I'm in the corner, I'm stuck." Then they started coughing violently, and the call cut out again. I tried to calm my own nerves, but I could feel my stomach tighten every time I heard that phone ring. I finally told one of my fellow volunteers, Mike, about the calls. He shrugged and said maybe it was just some hoax. But then he looked at me more seriously and asked if I was okay. I told him the truth, it was freaking me out. He suggested I talk to the chief. I considered it, but worried it would sound too bizarre. Instead, I kept responding alone. I would drive out to that abandoned lot and check. Sometimes I walked around the perimeter with my flashlight for a few minutes. I never found a single person there. The place looked the same each time. Dark, overgrown, and empty. After a few weeks of this, I started sleeping less on my nights off. I'd lie in bed thinking about that voice. I kept remembering the crackle, like faint flames. It reminded me of how calls usually sound when there's a real fire. Frantic, desperate. But there was no actual fire now. The last real incident there happened decades ago. The old records just said it was a serious event, and the lot was condemned afterward. No new structures were built. One night I decided to stay by the phone, fully awake, and record the call on a small handheld recorder. At 2:55 a.m., the phone rang. I put the recorder next to the receiver and answered in a steady voice. "Volunteer fire department, what's your emergency?" The voice wheezed. "Can't get out, it's too much, please hurry." I heard faint crackling in the background again. Then the line went dead. I stopped the recorder and played it back. The static was there, the rasping breath, but everything else was faint. I could barely make out the words, it didn't sound any clearer on playback. I couldn't figure out any rational explanation. It felt like these calls were from another time. But that's not logical, right? Still, every time I stood on that lot, I got this wave of unease. My skin prickled. The wind felt colder there, even if it was a mild night. Sometimes I thought I heard echoes, but it was probably my mind playing tricks on me. I considered the possibility of interference or phone line errors, but it happened too consistently, and always at that same time. I remember one early morning. I'd gotten back from a small trash fire across town. It was around 1:45 a.m., and I was dead tired. I settled onto the worn couch in the station's lounge, hoping to doze off for a bit, just before 3 a.m. And the phone's ring cut through the silence. I grabbed it, not even fully awake yet. The voice on the other end choked out something like, "Where are you? I'm burning up." My heart started hammering. I said, "I'm on my way. Hold on." Then the call ended, but I didn't hear an actual flame or see any glow in the sky. Still, I raced out in the truck, siren off so I wouldn't scare the neighborhood. When I reached the lot, it looked the same as before. Dark, quiet, empty. I got out, walked around, trying to see if there was any sign of activity. Nothing. I remember the crunch of gravel under my boots, the glare of my flashlight on broken glass. I felt frustrated, anxious, and confused all at once. At that point, I knew I had to bring it up with the chief. The next afternoon, I sat down in his cramped office. I explained everything, the odd number on the caller ID, the voice that always sounded frantic, the address references to that old lot. He listened but didn't say much. After I finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. He said he'd heard rumors a long time ago about unusual calls, but officially, there was no record of it. He suggested maybe the phone system was malfunctioning, or that someone was testing us. He told me to keep documenting every incident. If it continued, we'd contact the phone company to see if they could trace it. I agreed, but I didn't feel any better. There was no straightforward way to handle this. The calls kept coming. I started writing down every detail. Time, what the voice said, what I heard in the background, how long the call lasted. Sometimes the calls lasted 10 seconds, sometimes less. The voice never sounded calm or stable. It was always trembling, always on the verge of panic. I checked the local dispatch logs. No one else was reporting calls from random numbers. It was only coming through the volunteer fire department's line when I was on duty. My friends at the station teased me a bit, calling it the phantom caller, but I could tell it made them uneasy too. The phone company ran a trace but found nothing. They said the calls never registered as normal incoming lines. It's been a few months now, and I still get those calls whenever I'm on overnight duty. I've lost count of how many times I've driven out to that empty lot, flashlight in hand, searching for signs of a real emergency. Nothing changes. It's just the same chain link fence, the same cracked pavement, the same scattered debris. The place smells musty, like damp concrete. Every so often I catch a faint whiff of something like soot, but that might just be my imagination. I haven't found a single clue that anyone's been there recently. I don't know how this is happening. All I know is that a voice calls me in the early hours, always asking for help, always referencing that old location. I feel a knot in my stomach every time the phone rings now. I can't sleep well at the station. I jump at small sounds. I keep expecting to hear that rasping breath or that choked whisper. I keep answering because that's my job. I'm a firefighter. If someone calls for help, I have to respond. But no matter how many times I go, I never find anything real out there. I haven't told many people outside the station because I don't want folks in town to think I'm losing it. But I can't deny that something strange is going on. The fact that the address references an older version of the street, and the fact that the calls only come in when I'm around, freaks me out. I wonder if there's some glitch or some leftover phone line in the system, but the phone company swears that's impossible. I'm still here, still on shift some nights, still answering those calls. I keep a log, keep trying to figure out if there's a pattern to the times or the days. So far it seems random. Just late at night, always past midnight, usually around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Each time I jump, My body tenses up and I listen to that voice begging for help. I ask where they are, if they can hear me, if they can confirm an address. But the call always ends the same way: static and silence. I've talked to a few older residents in town, trying to see if anyone else had experiences like this. One retired firefighter said something about phone lines not always being disconnected properly in older areas, but that doesn't explain the voice referencing the exact old address. Another longtime resident said that area was cursed since the fire decades ago. I try not to dwell on that. I prefer concrete facts, but I can't ignore that gut feeling anymore. Now, whenever I'm driving near that old lot, I slow down and stare at it. My heart speeds up. I feel like I'm looking at a place stuck in time, as if it's waiting for something that never got resolved, but I'm not sure how to resolve it. For now, all I can do is keep doing my job, keep answering calls, keep checking that old lot. So far, I haven't seen any real sign of danger there. No new burn marks, no actual flames, nothing. But the phone keeps ringing in the middle of the night and the voice keeps begging for help, and I can't stop picking up. Because maybe one night I'll go out there and find something, or someone, who really does need me. That's where things stand. No children, no obvious explanations, no official incidents. Just a weird abandoned property, random phone calls, and a voice that sounds like it's stuck in a bad situation. I keep telling myself that I'm doing what I can, that I'm checking, I'm following procedure, and I'm staying safe. But every time the phone rings late at night, my throat goes dry, and my hands shake just a little, because I never know if this is the night I'll get there and see something I can't explain, something real that's been waiting for help all these years. I never expected to feel so uneasy in my own backyard. I always imagined that owning a house, especially an old one, would give me a sense of accomplishment and security. Instead, I'm standing here, 31 years old, married, and surrounded by strange noises that keep me awake at night. I'm not sure if I made a mistake buying this property, but there's no going back now. I want to explain what happened from the moment I started digging in the backyard to plant a small vegetable garden, right up to the night I heard that soft sobbing right behind me. I'll keep it as straightforward as possible. When my wife and I first moved in, we were excited. It's a 2-bedroom place with a large living room, a decent-sized kitchen, and a big backyard that looks perfect for gardening. The house has a creaky front door and chipped paint on the window frames. The wood floors show their age with every step, but I kind of like that. It feels lived in, like it has a story. The real estate agent said the house had been empty for a few years. She didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask. The price was good, and my wife loved the old-fashioned charm. On my first free weekend, I decided to tackle that backyard project. I got a shovel, gloves, a wheelbarrow, and a few packets of seeds. I'm not a seasoned gardener or anything, but I thought it would be nice to grow my own vegetables. My wife was inside, trying to set up her office. She's the type who hates clutter, so I knew she'd be in there all day, sorting through files and books. I wanted to surprise her with a small herb garden or something simple, so I found a spot near the back fence where the soil looked softer. I started digging. At first, it felt good to break a sweat and put some work into my new home. The sun was out and the air was warm, but after about 10 minutes, the shovel hit something hard. I stopped and cleared away some dirt. I found a little fragment of what looked like old ceramic. It wasn't just a rock, it had a pattern on it. I brushed off the dirt with my hand and noticed a kind of faded blue color. Curious, I dug a bit more, thinking maybe it was part of a plate or a bowl. Then I found more pieces. They looked like the edges of something handmade. The designs were worn, but I could tell they were deliberate shapes. I placed them aside carefully, thinking I'd clean them and maybe put them on a shelf as a conversation piece. Then the shovel struck another object. I reached down and picked up what looked like a small curved metal piece. It had a tiny hole at one end, like it was meant for an earring or maybe some jewelry. It was dull and grimy, and I wasn't sure what kind of metal it was. Iron? Copper? It was too dirty to tell. I remember shrugging and thinking it was cool but not life-changing. I placed it with the ceramic fragments and continued digging. I didn't see anything else in that hole. Eventually, I finished loosening the dirt for my little garden plot. I figured I'd soak the ceramic and the earring later to see if they revealed any clearer markings. I washed my hands with the hose, left the items on a ledge by the back door, and went inside. By then, it was mid-afternoon, and I wanted a sandwich. That night, everything felt normal until around 9 o'clock. My wife and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. Suddenly, I heard a strange rustling outside. It wasn't leaves in the wind. This was something else. I paused the show. She heard it too, but she shrugged and said maybe it was an animal, like a stray cat. I'm not used to living in a place with a big yard, so I assumed that was the case. We went back to watching TV. About an hour later, I stepped outside to throw some trash in the bin. I noticed the air felt colder near the spot where I had dug. It was an odd kind of chill, like a narrow current of cold air flowing right by the hole I'd made. I got a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. I'm not one to jump to supernatural conclusions. I walked around the yard, looking for anything that might be causing it, but saw nothing unusual. The fence was still standing. The neighbors' lights were off and there wasn't any strong breeze blowing anywhere else. Just that one spot felt cold. I went back inside and locked the door. The next morning I got up early to check on the soil. I wanted to see if it had settled overnight before I planted the seeds. When I approached the garden plot, I saw footprints in the dirt. They were small, like a woman's footprints, and they led to the center of the plot where I had dug up the ceramic and the metal. Then they disappeared. My wife's feet are about that size, but she hadn't left the house that morning. She was still in bed. And these prints were barefoot, clear as day, etched into the soft soil. I felt my chest tighten. I walked over them carefully, comparing my shoe size to the prints. They definitely weren't mine, and they looked fresh, like someone had just stepped there a few hours earlier. I went back inside and asked my wife if she'd gone out there at any point. She hadn't. I double-checked the locks, but everything was secure. No gates left open, no sign of forced entry. I cleaned up the footprints with the back of a rake, spreading the soil to hide them because they freaked me out. My wife told me I was probably seeing things, but she could tell I was a little shaken. I didn't want to argue, so I just let it go. That evening, I went outside to put away some empty boxes and heard a soft murmur near the fence line. It was a low voice, but I couldn't understand a single word. It sounded like a woman whispering or humming. My pulse started racing. I called out, "Hello?" No response. Then I heard a quick shuffle, like feet dragging in the grass. I spun around but saw nothing except the dim outline of the yard. The security light on the back porch only lit up a small area near the door, so the rest of the yard was dark. I stood there for a second, my heart pounding, then went inside and locked the door. Over the next few days, the cold spot grew more noticeable. My wife mentioned it once when we were both outside. She walked across the yard and felt a sudden chill near that same spot. She made a joke about the yard being haunted, and we both tried to laugh it off. But I kept remembering those footprints. I also found myself checking the back door before going to bed, making sure it was locked. One afternoon, I decided to take a closer look at the ceramic fragments and the earring. I scrubbed them carefully in a bucket of warm, soapy water. The ceramic looked like pieces of a bowl or a small pot with hand-painted designs. I couldn't make out the pattern, but it had lines that formed small shapes, maybe flowers or some geometric pattern. The earring, or whatever that metal piece was, seemed to have a small decorative edge. I still couldn't identify the metal, but it was definitely old. It had a few tiny rust spots or maybe greenish corrosion. I placed them in a box and left them on a high shelf in my living room. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I heard a faint sound outside, like someone crying softly. It wasn't a dramatic wail. It was a gentle sobbing noise. My heart felt like it was pounding against my ribs. I didn't want to go outside alone, but I also felt this urge to check. My wife was asleep, and I didn't want to wake her up just yet. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, opened the back door slowly, and stepped onto the porch. The cold air hit me immediately, more intense than before. I looked around, shining the flashlight over the grass. The beam fell on the spot where I dug the garden. I saw nothing, but the crying continued, so faint I had to strain my ears to follow it. I stepped off the porch, feeling the wet grass under my bare feet. I followed the sound toward the fence. As I got closer, the crying seemed to move. I spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction. Suddenly it stopped. No more crying. I stood there, trying not to breathe too loudly. Then I heard a soft crunch behind me, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I whipped around, aiming the flashlight. I saw the fence, the small row of bushes along it, and the empty space by my dug-up garden. Nothing else. I could feel my hands shaking. I backed up toward the porch. My mind was racing, thinking about intruders or squatters, but there was nobody there. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood in the kitchen, trying to calm down. My breath was shallow, and my shoulders were tense. I felt a tingling on my neck like I just walked through a cold draft. I stood there until my pulse slowed. Then I climbed back into bed without waking my wife. I didn't sleep well that night. In the days that followed, I heard more of those muffled sounds. Sometimes they were like whispers. Other times they were quick little gasps. My wife heard them once or twice, but never as clearly as I did. She started getting nervous too. We both felt uneasy about going out back after sunset. It was a strange shift in our routine because we'd been so excited about the yard, and now we avoided it at night. One morning, I decided to dig a little deeper in that same spot to see if I could find more pieces of whatever was buried there. I reasoned that maybe uncovering the rest of the ceramics or artifacts might help me understand what was going on. Maybe there was some local story about the property I should know. I started shoveling around noon on a Saturday. The weather was clear, and the sun was bright overhead. I dug carefully, setting aside any dirt that looked like it might contain fragments. After about an hour, I uncovered a few more bits of ceramic, but nothing large, and nothing that gave me any clear answers. While I was crouched there, sifting through the dirt, I felt a sudden gust of cold air again. It made the hair on my arms stand up. It was hot outside, so feeling that cold rush was jarring. I dropped the shovel and stood up, looking around. The breeze seemed to come from the center of the yard, the same place as before. I felt a strong sense of being watched. I can't describe it better than that. Just a raw sensation that something was right behind me. I spun around, but I was alone. I decided to fill the hole back in. My instinct was telling me not to keep digging. I took the new ceramic fragments inside and set them next to the others. I washed the dirt off my clothes in the laundry sink and tried to forget about it. But that night the crying sounded louder. This time my wife and I both woke up. We looked at each other in the dark. Neither of us spoke. We knew we were hearing the same thing. Soft sobbing, as if someone was in pain or lonely, right outside our window. I got up and turned on the backyard floodlight. The crying stopped. My wife peeked out the window. Nothing moved. The yard was still. Just the faint glow illuminating the fence, the grass, and the small mound of earth where I'd filled the hole. I switched off the light after a few minutes and we tried to sleep again. Since then, the whispers and the cold gusts have been on and off. I keep checking that area in the morning, looking for footprints or signs of someone trespassing. I haven't found any more footprints, but I still feel that presence. Some nights, it's just a small shift in the wind. Other nights, it's like a faint voice calling from the back corner of the yard, where the fence meets the tall bushes. I can't understand the words, if there are any words at all. It's more like a moan or a sigh. I've had a few neighbors stop by to introduce themselves. None of them mentioned anything unusual about the property. I haven't brought it up because I don't want them to think I'm nuts. My wife has joked about selling and moving somewhere else, but I don't think she's serious. We spent a lot of our savings on this place, and it still has a lot of potential. I try to focus on the parts of the house that feel warm and welcoming. Our living room, the kitchen where we share breakfast, the small deck where we sometimes sit and have coffee in the morning. Still, there's this nagging thought in the back of my mind. What if there's something buried out there that's better left alone? What if the old ceramic pieces in that metal earring were part of someone's past that won't let go? The real estate agent said the house was empty for a long time. Maybe the previous owner knew something we don't. Part of me wants to keep digging, to find an explanation. Another part of me wants to forget I ever saw those fragments and just leave the ground undisturbed. Right now, I'm stuck in limbo. I haven't planted anything yet because I don't feel comfortable out there. My wife asked if we should hire someone to check for old septic tanks or buried junk. I told her maybe, but I know that won't help if this is something more than just trash in the ground. Every day, I wake up hoping I'll feel normal again. Instead, I hear a whisper when I take out the trash, or a sob that fades the moment I step outside, or I feel that icy gust swirl around my legs before disappearing. I wish I had answers, but all I have is a growing sense of dread. I see those small footprints in my mind, the cold wind that never blows anywhere else, and that low murmuring that sounds too human to be an animal. I want to believe it's all in my head, but every time I go near that spot, my skin prickles and my heart rate spikes. That's not my imagination. My wife and I agreed that we'll give it some time before making any decisions. I put the ceramic fragments and the metal earring in a drawer in our bedroom. If things get worse, I might consider calling some expert, maybe a historian who knows the area. For now, I'm just trying to live with it. I lock the back door every night, close the curtains, and do my best to ignore the faint sounds that slip through the walls after midnight. But I can't shake the feeling that something's waiting for me to return to that hole, to keep digging until I find whatever else is hidden there. Part of me fears that if I do, I'll regret it. For now, I'm just a man trying to keep my life normal in a place that doesn't feel entirely like my own anymore. I don't know where this ends, but I know that every night I listen for that faint sobbing, and every night it gets a little harder to pretend it's not really there. I moved into this cramped apartment about 3 weeks ago, and I thought the biggest annoyance would be the single tiny bathroom. I was wrong. From my first night here, something felt off. I shrugged it off as typical new place jitters, but within days I started noticing that strange flare of light in the bathroom mirror. It happened whenever I was in there late at night, usually between midnight and 1 in the morning. At first I convinced myself it was a trick of my tired eyes. Now I'm not so sure. My bathroom is small. There's just enough space for the toilet, a narrow sink, and a stand-up shower. The walls are white, and there's a simple overhead bulb that I switch on and off. The mirror is mounted right above the sink. The entire setup feels claustrophobic, especially when I close the door. There's a small fan vent, but it doesn't do much. The first night I noticed the reflection, I was brushing my teeth and saw a bright flash behind me. It was quick, like someone had flipped a flashlight on and off. I spun around, but there's no window, no extra lamp, nothing that could produce that beam. The hallway light was off. The only source of illumination was the bulb in the ceiling. I shook my head, finished brushing, and turned in. I told myself it was a reflection from my phone or something else. I checked my phone's screen, but it was dark. The next day, I forgot about it. The second time I noticed it, it was about 12:30 at night. I'd come home late from work. I was sweaty and wanted a quick shower. I turned on the overhead light, hopped in the shower, and tried to relax under the water. The curtain is transparent, so I can still see the mirror from inside. While washing soap off my hair, I saw that flash again. It was in the mirror. This time, I saw movement in the reflection, like someone had just walked by. My heart raced. I blinked several times, then grabbed the curtain to open it. The bathroom was empty. My hallway was dark. The apartment door was locked. I listened for footsteps. There was no sound besides the steady drip of the shower. After I rinsed off, I stood there in the bathroom, water pooling on the floor because I hadn't put a towel down yet. I kept staring at the mirror, half expecting that flash of light again. My skin felt cold. My breathing got shallow. I felt my pulse in my neck. Nothing happened for the rest of that night. I dried off, got dressed, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't shake that feeling that something was off. I even checked if there was some weird reflection from the overhead light. I twisted the bulb in its socket, repositioned it a bit, but the light didn't flicker. It stayed steady and dull, the same as always. Over the next few days, I got busier with my job. I work at a call center, so my evenings are long. I often get home around 11 or midnight, which lines up too well with the time these occurrences happen. One night, I came in exhausted. I ate a quick sandwich, feeling too tired for anything else. Then I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. I had that same tension in my shoulders and that same unease in my chest. I flicked on the light and stared at my reflection for a second. I looked tired. The overhead light made my face look pale. I turned on the faucet. The water sputtered for a moment, which it sometimes does in this old building. I started brushing my teeth, waiting for that weird flash. Part of me wanted to see it again, just to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I stared at myself, blinked, breathed through my nose, and nothing happened for a minute or so. Right when I started to let my guard down, the light flared behind me again, like someone had switched on a bright lamp. For a split second, the mirror showed a shadow of a person standing directly behind my left shoulder. I dropped my toothbrush. I spun around and there was nobody. My heart felt like it might burst. My mouth was still full of toothpaste foam. I spat it out in the sink, but my hands were shaking. I had that sense of my stomach dropping, like I'd just been caught off guard by a loud noise. The mirror reflection had shown something. I wasn't imagining it. I tried to calm down by running the tap water and splashing my face. The water felt cold, which grounded me a bit. I looked back at the mirror. Nothing was there. I decided maybe the mirror itself was faulty. I went to a discount home goods store the next day and bought a new mirror that was about the same size. I took the old one down, which required some prying since it was attached to the wall with strong adhesive. I used some double-sided mounting tape for the new one and tested it in the afternoon. Everything looked normal. I felt relieved, almost proud of myself for finding a logical solution. That night, I walked into the bathroom around midnight. I was feeling confident. The new mirror looked fine. I turned on the overhead light and checked myself in the glass. I ran my hand over my hair, turned my head, tested angles. Everything was quiet. Then about 1 minute in, I saw it again. A burst of intense light behind me. It wasn't soft. It was like a camera flash going off. This time my entire body tensed, and I felt pins and needles in my arms. My eyes widened. I stared into the mirror, and I was absolutely sure I caught a glimpse of movement, as though someone took one step behind me. No one was there when I turned around. I opened the bathroom door and looked into my living area. My kitnet is basically one open space with a small kitchenette and a bed, plus the bathroom. There's nowhere to hide. I walked around, checking corners, checking under the bed. Nobody was there. I sat on my couch, catching my breath. I felt sweat on my forehead. I wiped it with the back of my hand. My hands were shaking again. I didn't sleep well that night. These incidents kept happening, always between midnight and 1. Sometimes I just heard a faint breath near my ear. That was even worse than the flash. It sounded like someone was quietly breathing right next to me. It lasted maybe half a second, but it sent a chill down my spine. It happened on at least 5 different nights, always around the time I brushed my teeth or used the toilet before bed. I tried ignoring the mirror altogether, but I still heard that breath behind me. I'm not someone who scares easily, but this was getting to me. At one point, I tried to convince myself it was old pipes or the vent fan making a weird noise. The building is old. Sometimes old buildings have random creaks and airflows, but that faint breath sounded too human. It was soft and quick, like a short exhale. I tried asking my neighbor if they had any odd experiences. The guy said no and looked at me like I was nuts. He went back into his place before I could ask anything else. My landlord just told me to check the bulb and the ventilation system, which I had already done. I emailed him about the mirror issue, and he said he had no reports from previous tenants about anything like that. He wasn't helpful at all. One night, I got fed up and decided to record a video on my phone while in the bathroom. I set the phone on top of the sink, leaning it against the medicine cabinet. I turned off all the lights outside the bathroom, so the only light source was the overhead bulb. It was around 12:15 when I started recording. I stood there brushing my teeth, letting the phone film the mirror and me. At first, nothing happened. I could hear the hum of the overhead fan. My breath was a little shaky. My stomach felt tense. After about a minute, I caught the flash out of the corner of my eye. It was bright and quick. I jumped, but I forced myself not to look away from the mirror. My pulse hammered in my chest. I didn't see a clear figure this time, just that sudden light behind me. I finished brushing, rinsed my mouth, and turned off the camera. When I watched the footage, I saw the bathroom with me brushing my teeth. Then, at around 55 seconds in, the bathroom just lit up for a second. On camera, the flash was milder than what I saw in person, but it was definitely there. It looked like a quick glare. I didn't hear the breath in the recording, though, which frustrated me. I replayed the clip multiple times. I tried to see if maybe a car's headlights could have caused it, but my bathroom is internal. There are no windows. The hallway outside has no windows either. There's just a corridor with a single light bulb, which was off. I saved the video. I considered showing it to my friend who works in IT, but I felt embarrassed. A few nights later, I had another intense experience. I was finishing up in the shower around 12:40. The water was hot, and the bathroom mirror fogged up. When I turned off the water, I wiped the steam from the mirror with my hand. Right then, the light in the mirror flashed so brightly that it hurt my eyes. My whole body jerked backward, and I felt my throat tighten. My breath caught. I reached out to stabilize myself against the sink. The reflection in the mirror showed a shape behind me, but I couldn't make it out. I turned, but there was nothing. I felt a rush of cold air, even though the shower had been on hot. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself. I yanked the bathroom door open. My living space was dark and silent. No air conditioner running, no fan. I stood there breathing heavily, my legs tense. It took me a few minutes to calm down enough to get dressed. After that, I started dreading my own bathroom. I considered changing my schedule. I thought about brushing my teeth earlier in the evening or just waiting until the early morning. But sometimes my shifts ended too late. I have to shower before bed, or I feel gross. Also, I can't just avoid my own bathroom. That's not practical. But every time I step inside, my heart rate goes up. I keep glancing at that mirror. I tried placing a small cloth over it once, but I still heard that short breath. I tore the cloth off because it made me more nervous, like I was preparing a stage for something I couldn't see. Last week, I tried to invite a friend over. I just wanted some company. He came by around 11, and we hung out in the main room talking about sports. I told him about the mirror, but he kind of laughed it off. Around midnight, I asked him to go to the bathroom and just check if he noticed anything odd. He agreed. I sat on the couch waiting. He was in there for about 2 minutes and came out looking normal. He said, "Dude, I didn't see anything. Your bathroom is just small. I heard the fan. That's all." I felt frustrated. I offered for him to stay later, but he wanted to go home. After he left, I went to check the bathroom. It was about 12:30 at that point. The instant I walked in, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I heard that short exhale, very close. My body stiffened. Then the mirror flashed behind me, forcing me to close my eyes. When I opened them, I couldn't see properly for a second. My vision had spots. I don't know how to explain that. My friend apparently saw nothing. This pattern has continued every few days. I'm starting to consider leaving this place. My lease is for a year, though, and I don't have enough money to break it right now. I've tried turning all the lights on in the entire apartment, thinking that maybe I just need more brightness overall. That didn't fix it. I replaced the overhead bulb with a different wattage. No change. I taped up the edges of the bathroom door, thinking maybe hallway light was slipping in, but there's barely any gap, and the corridor light is off at night anyway. No matter what I do, the flash and that odd silhouette appear at least once a week. I sleep poorly most nights. My body is always tense. My back aches from the stress and I grind my teeth. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear faint movement in the bathroom, like a shuffle or a step on the tiles. but whenever I listen harder, it goes quiet. I've started leaving the door closed with the bathroom light off, but that only makes me feel more uneasy. The weirdest part is that I've never felt physical harm. I don't see objects move or anything like that. It's always the same pattern: a sudden flare of light in the mirror, a hint of a person's shadow, and sometimes a short breath. Then it's gone, but it leaves me feeling shaken and disoriented. My hands sweat. My knees feel weak. My mind races, trying to figure out if there's some logical explanation I'm missing. Could there be a wiring problem causing a surge of brightness in the bulb? But I've changed bulbs. I've turned the lights on and off rapidly, trying to recreate the effect. I've tried standing with my phone flashlight on. None of that reproduces the flash in the mirror. At this point, I'm just living with it. Every evening, I come home, make something quick to eat, and push that bathroom trip to the last possible moment. When I finally go in there, I keep my hand on the light switch, half expecting something to jump out at me. Once or twice I've gone in and nothing unusual happened. But that just puts me on edge, because I expect it the next time. I have no idea if this will escalate. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it. Right now, I'm functioning on minimal sleep. I'm always jittery. My job performance is slipping, and my boss asked if I'm dealing with stress. I told him I'm having trouble at home. That's true, but I couldn't explain it. I don't even fully believe it myself. Yet every time I see that burst of light or hear that breath, I'm reminded that something real is going on. I've considered sleeping somewhere else. I looked at local hotels, but they're too expensive for me to do regularly. I thought about crashing on a friend's couch, but I don't want to explain the reason. I'm trying to handle this on my own. I keep telling myself it's just a weird phenomenon, something that will eventually stop. But so far it hasn't. That's the situation. I'm alone in a small apartment with a bathroom mirror that shows these random bright flashes at night, accompanied by a faint breath and a fleeting shadow. It's impossible to ignore. I've recorded a bit of it, but the footage isn't conclusive. I've replaced the mirror, the light bulb, and even rearranged the bathroom items to see if something was reflecting the light. Nothing helps. Every time it happens, I feel my skin crawl. I'm not sure how I'll fix it, I just know I have to live with it for now. And it's the worst part about coming home late. I never know if I'll be able to get through my nighttime routine without that flash in the mirror or that breath on my neck. It's always hanging over me, making the simple act of brushing my teeth feel like a test of my nerves. And that's my life here so far. I never expected to hear soft country melodies in my grandmother's old house with all the power shut off. Yet that's exactly what happened the first week I moved in. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't constant, but around 6 in the evening, I heard those slow tunes drifting through the hall. No radio was on. No phone or music player was nearby. I checked every corner. I heard that gentle twang of a steel string guitar and the low hum of a voice that sounded like it was coming from somewhere near the kitchen. My muscles tensed, and my chest felt tight. I stood there, listening, with my hands sweating and my heart beating fast. I'm 36 now, and this house came to me when my grandmother could no longer live on her own. She always said it would be mine someday, so I decided it was the right time to move in and see if I could build a new life here. I had plenty of good memories from this place. My grandmother used to make coffee in the afternoon and hum those same tunes while she waited for the pot to fill. She kept a rocking chair by the kitchen window. She would sit there and watch the birds outside. She loved simple things like that. I still picture her hands folding a dish towel, or her eyes lighting up whenever someone walked in. She was kind, but she also had a stern side when things didn't go her way. She believed in old traditions, especially around the house. I never questioned it much. I arrived with a few boxes, a mattress, and a suitcase of clothes. I had no real plan beyond unpacking and settling in. On my first day, I walked through each room. The house is simple. There's a small living room with a sofa that's been here for decades. The cushions are thin now. The kitchen is bigger than you'd expect. It has a big wooden table, a few chairs, and that rocking chair I mentioned. The walls are faded cream color. Some of the cabinets creak when I open them. There's one short hallway leading to the bedroom and a tiny bathroom. That's about it. The first week was normal except for a few odd sounds in the late afternoon. I thought it was just the house settling. Wood floors tend to make little cracks and pops. But then, around 6 in the evening, I heard that melody. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone had a small radio playing in the kitchen. I walked over and checked every possible source. The lights were on, but the TV was off. My phone was charging, and I knew it wasn't playing anything. I checked the back door. It was locked. Nobody was outside. I stood in the doorway for a minute, listening. My breathing got shallow. The tunes faded. I told myself it was probably a neighbor, but the nearest house is a good distance away. The next day, I heard it again. This time, I felt a chill on my skin. My grandmother used to love that specific style of country music, slow, almost a bit sad. I leaned against the counter, waiting for it to stop. The melody floated around me for maybe half a minute. Then it vanished. I got annoyed because it made no sense. I'm a logical guy. I went to the fuse box in the small laundry area and shut off all the breakers. No power at all in the house. I made sure the refrigerator was off, all the lights were off, and the place was silent. I sat down at the kitchen table. The sun was going down and the house was getting dark. I waited until 6. Right on cue, that soft country tune started drifting through the air. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I felt a pressure in my chest that made me swallow hard. I walked toward the back of the kitchen trying to find the source. The sound seemed to come from the corner where the rocking chair was. But there was nothing there. The house was dark, and I could barely see. The melody lasted 10 or 15 seconds, then stopped. I stayed there for a few more minutes, listening for anything else, but everything was quiet. I flipped the breakers back on. When the lights returned, I kept checking that corner. The rocking chair was still. It didn't show any sign of movement. I touched it. It was cold and dusty. I stared at it for a few moments. My throat was dry. I felt uneasy, but I tried to convince myself it was just a weird quirk of the house. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. I felt foolish, but I did it anyway. I didn't hear any music in the middle of the night, so I started to relax. Over the next few days, I focused on cleaning. I scrubbed the kitchen floor. I wiped down the cabinets. I found a bunch of old plates with floral patterns. I opened some boxes of old clothes that had a musty smell, probably from being in storage. I found a few old notebooks, some of my grandmother's personal items. Nothing strange happened during the day besides the occasional creak. Around 6 in the evening, I either stepped outside or put on my headphones so I wouldn't pay attention to any faint sounds. I tried to avoid it, but a few times I heard something faint. It always stopped as soon as I walked toward the kitchen. Everything escalated one night about 2 weeks in. I was asleep in the bedroom. I keep my door closed because the hallway light can be distracting. I remember rolling over and glancing at my phone to check the time. It was close to midnight. That's when I noticed a soft, drawn-out musical phrase coming from the other side of the door. It reminded me of the same songs my grandmother used to hum when she was sad or missing someone. My heart started pounding. My stomach felt tight. My hands got clammy, and I realized I was sweating even though the room was cool. I sat up in bed and listened. The music was faint, but I couldn't ignore it. It had the same guitar notes, the same slow tempo. I got out of bed wearing just a t-shirt and shorts. The air felt colder than usual. I stepped toward the door, and the wood floor squeaked. I placed my hand on the doorknob and paused. My chest felt heavy. I opened the door carefully. The hallway was dark, except for a thin line of light that came from the kitchen area. I knew I had turned all the lights off before going to bed. The only light should have been in the hallway, but that was also off. My breathing grew fast and my pulse hammered in my ears. I took a few steps forward. The music was stronger now, like it was right around the corner. I moved down the hallway. My legs felt stiff. I turned my head toward the kitchen and saw that the door was half open. Light spilled out from inside, making a pale glow on the floor. I smelled something faint, like coffee or old cooking oil, but I hadn't cooked anything that evening. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. My mind was racing with questions. My palms were sweating, and I couldn't stop my fingers from trembling. I stepped through the threshold. The kitchen light was on. The overhead lamp cast a dull yellow light over everything. The music was coming from near the table. It sounded like a soft voice humming along to a guitar recording, but there was no device in sight. My eyes were drawn to the rocking chair. It was moving back and forth, very slowly, like someone had just pushed off with their foot. I stood there, frozen, watching that seat tilt forward and back. The seat was empty. The air felt thick, almost like it was pressing down on my shoulders. I felt my scalp tingle. My legs were tense and I wanted to back away, but I also felt compelled to see if someone was there. I took a step closer to the chair. It creaked, still moving in a gentle rhythm. The music had that same sad tone. It made my chest hurt, as if I was remembering something painful. But I pushed that feeling aside. All I wanted was for it to stop. I reached out to grab the back of the rocking chair. My hand was shaking. I touched the wood. It was cold, like it had been sitting outside on a chilly night. As soon as my hand made contact, the music cut off. The chair stopped moving. The room became quiet. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. I looked around. The kitchen was exactly how I had left it earlier in the evening. Same table, same chairs, nothing out of place. I turned off the overhead light, then walked back down the hall. My footsteps were loud on the floor. My heart was still racing. I turned on the hallway light and left it on until morning. The next day, I decided to check the house more thoroughly. I walked around the perimeter outside. The yard is big, with some weeds and an old clothesline. There was no sign that anyone was sneaking around. The windows were all closed, the doors were locked. I went back inside and spent the day reorganizing. I moved a few pieces of furniture to different spots. I replaced a couple of light bulbs that had burned out. I tried to keep my mind busy so I wouldn't dwell on what happened. By early evening, I felt that tightness in my stomach again, like I was bracing for something. So I turned on the TV and increased the volume. I wanted to block out any noise. For a moment, I thought I heard that faint guitar in the background of the show I was watching, but it might have been my imagination. Around 9 at night, I walked into the kitchen to make a sandwich. The rocking chair was still there, motionless. I tossed a quick glance at it before opening the fridge. Everything felt normal. Then the overhead light started to flicker. I paused, hand on the fridge door, feeling my pulse rise again. The flickering stopped after a few seconds. I waited, expecting to hear some melody, but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I made my sandwich and ate it standing up, glancing every so often at the rocking chair. It didn't move. The light stayed on. It was just an everyday moment in an old kitchen, except I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night I slept with the door open. I didn't want to feel trapped in the bedroom. I kept a small lamp on in the living room. I listened for any music, any hint of a guitar or a voice, but nothing came. It was a quiet night. When I woke up the following morning, I felt a bit more confident. I told myself maybe it was some weird electrical interference or random acoustics in the house. But by the end of that week, the same pattern returned. Around 6 in the evening, soft country tunes floated through the kitchen. Sometimes I stood in the hallway and listened for a moment, forcing myself to stay calm. My muscles would tense and my breathing would speed up, but I tried not to panic. One night, I tried recording the sound on my phone. I walked into the kitchen with my camera app open, but as soon as I approached the rocking chair, the music faded out. I replayed the video, and there was nothing but static and my own breathing. My frustration grew, and my nerves were on edge. I called an electrician to check the wiring. He spent about an hour looking at the breakers, the outlets, and the fixtures. He said everything was fine. He tested the lights, tested the circuits. He didn't find any problems. I thanked him and watched him drive away. I stood on the porch for a few minutes, then headed back inside. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet. I wandered into the kitchen and found the rocking chair tilted at an angle, as if someone had just gotten up. I stared at it, feeling a knot in my stomach. I hadn't been in the kitchen since morning, and I knew I left the chair pushed against the wall. I walked over and placed my hand on the back of the chair. My heart was thudding. The wood felt room temperature, not cold this time. I pushed it gently. It started rocking back and forth, making that old squeaking sound. It reminded me of the times my grandmother used to sit there. She would sip coffee, talk about her day, maybe hum a tune or two. But there was nobody in that chair now. I stood there for a bit, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I shoved the chair firmly against the wall and went to the living room. I don't know what's happening in this house. Sometimes I wonder if my grandmother left a part of herself here, tied to her memories. Other times, I wonder if something else has latched onto the old routines, using those songs to get under my skin. I feel uneasy in the evenings, especially when 6 o'clock approaches. I've tried staying outside until it passes, but whenever I walk back in, I sense that thick feeling in the air. My arms break out in goosebumps, and I move around, checking corners and cabinets like I'm looking for someone hiding there. I haven't found anything, but I keep hearing those sad country tunes. And some nights that rocking chair moves on its own. I'm not ready to leave this place yet. Something tells me I should face it. I don't have a clear explanation for the music or the flickering lights or the rocking chair, but I'm still here. I sleep lightly, and I keep the hallway light on. I keep the phone by my bed. Sometimes I pace around the kitchen waiting for those songs, trying to see if I can catch them at the exact moment they start. I never do. They always begin when I'm not looking. They stop when I'm too close. They return the moment I try to relax. That's been my life in this house for the past month. I can't say I feel comfortable, but I also can't say I'm ready to give up. Each day I wake up, walk through the same rooms, and look at the same rocking chair. I wait for that melody around 6. Some nights I hear it, some nights I don't. But whenever it comes, my chest tightens and my hands shake. I wonder what I'm going to discover if I keep digging. Maybe it's just old memories playing tricks on me. Maybe it's something else. Either way, the music keeps playing, and I keep listening. I never thought I'd hear my dog's bark again, especially after he was gone for good. But one night it happened. It wasn't a dream or a memory playing tricks on me. It was real enough that I jumped out of my chair and went straight to the window. That single bark cut through the silence in my backyard, and it sounded just like Thor. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, step by step, without dressing it up. I'm still not sure what's going on, but I'll share every strange detail I've experienced. My name is Carlos, and I'm 43 years old. I live alone in a single-story house with a big backyard. I used to spend my evenings out there with my dog, Thor. He was strong and he had a loud bark. He liked to run circles around me when I tossed a ball for him. After he died, I felt empty. I still went outside at night to clear my head, but it never felt right without him. I'd stand near the back door and think about how he used to dash to the fence if he spotted a squirrel. I missed those simple moments. Sometimes I'd go to the spot where he used to nap, just a corner of the yard with some old blankets and chew toys. It was my way of hanging on to that connection. The first time I heard the bark, I was in my living room, watching TV. It was around 9 at night, and the neighborhood was quiet. No one was out mowing their lawn or talking in their driveway. I had the windows closed, but I heard this low bark that made me mute the TV. At first I told myself it was just a neighbor's dog, but I recognized that bark's tone and pitch. It had that same rise and fall Thor used to have, especially when he wanted my attention. My chest tightened and I felt my hands start to shake. I got up and walked slowly toward the window. I stood there for a moment, listening. It was silent again. Then my heart pounded because I thought I heard the faint sound of paws on grass. But when I lifted the curtain, I couldn't see anything moving. I turned on the backyard light. My yard is pretty big, so the floodlight only illuminates part of it, leaving the back corners in shadow. I scanned every inch I could see. The fence was still. The grass wasn't moving. There was no sign of an animal. I stepped onto my back porch, bracing myself for something to leap out. But there was nothing. I walked over to the corner where Thor used to sleep. The ground looked undisturbed, and I didn't feel any breeze. I bent down, touched the grass, and looked around. I didn't see paw prints, and I didn't find any sign of a dog. Confused, I returned to the house, locking the door behind me. Over the next few nights, I tried to shrug it off as my imagination. I told myself I was just missing Thor too much. But then it happened again. It was around midnight. I was in the kitchen, washing a plate, and I heard a short bark. It sounded like it was coming from the backyard. I froze, turned off the faucet, and stood completely still. My heart thumped so hard that I felt my pulse in my temples. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It sounded exactly like Thor. I ran to the back door and peered out. Just as I looked through the glass, I heard the rustle of grass like something sprinting across it. The motion-activated light clicked on, but I saw no dog. All I saw was a slight quiver in the taller patches of grass, as if something had just passed by. No shape, no outline, just movement in the grass. Then it was still. I stepped outside, expecting to find a stray dog. The hair on my arms stood up, my stomach twisted, and my mouth went dry. I took a few steps onto the grass. I called out, "Hello?" But I felt silly. I didn't really know who or what I was speaking to. Silence pressed down on me. I waited for maybe 2 minutes, just listening for a shuffle or a bark. Nothing. I glanced at the corner where Thor used to lie. Everything looked normal. I exhaled and walked back inside, locking the door again. I couldn't shake off the chill that ran through my body. I sat on the couch and stayed awake until morning, replaying the sound in my head. After that, I started paying closer attention. I left my bedroom window slightly open at night, even though I normally keep it shut. I wanted to hear any noises in the backyard. By the third night, I heard those faint barks again, around the same time, midnight. They never lasted long, maybe 2 or 3 short barks. Then I'd catch the sound of movement across the lawn. I tried turning on the outside light quickly to spot the source, but I never saw any form, never saw eyes reflecting the light. The barks always stopped the moment I flicked the switch. One night I decided to wait outside, sitting in a patio chair with the lights off. I wanted to catch whatever was out there by surprise. I wore dark clothes and sat very still. The sky was clear, and the moon gave me enough light to see around me. My house sits at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, and beyond my fence are a few empty lots. It's normal for stray dogs to wander around, so I kept thinking maybe it was just one of them who sounded a lot like Thor. But as I waited, I started to get an uneasy feeling in my gut. At around 12:30, I heard the barking. It was faint, but it seemed very close. Then I heard what sounded like paws running right past me within a few feet. My breath caught, and I slowly turned my head. I saw the grass shifting, just a small area that bent under some invisible weight. My entire body tensed, my mind raced. I wanted to jump up, but I stayed still. The soft rustling moved toward the corner where Thor used to sleep. Then it stopped. I stared into that corner, but all I saw was the shadow of the fence. I felt a cool sweat break out on my forehead. I could hear my pulse whooshing in my ears. After a few seconds, the noise stopped altogether. I stayed there another hour, but I didn't hear anything else. Finally, I couldn't stand the tension anymore, so I went back inside. Later that week, something else happened that rattled me. I got up early to water the plants in the backyard. I reached for Thor's old water bowl, the stainless steel one that's still outside near the hose. I always left it there even after he died because I didn't have the heart to move it. When I saw it that morning, it was flipped over. That didn't sound like a big deal at first. But I remembered how Thor used to do that to signal he wanted fresh water. He'd flip his bowl with his paw and then bark at me. I felt my stomach flip when I saw it lying there upside down. The evening before, I'd noticed it sitting upright, half filled with rainwater. Now it was completely flipped. I picked it up, turned it right side up, and stared at it. I rubbed my hand over the rim, expecting maybe to see a scratch or a clue. Nothing. It looked the same. But I felt a rush of anxiety creep up my neck. There hadn't been any wind strong enough to flip a heavy stainless steel bowl. There hadn't been a storm or a neighbor's cat messing around. I doubted a cat could flip that bowl so cleanly anyway. It felt like Thor's old habit all over again. That evening, I stayed in my living room with the lights off. I wanted to see if something would happen near that bowl. Around midnight, I heard the barking once more. I moved closer to the window. My mouth felt dry and my chest felt tight again. I forced myself to breathe slowly so I wouldn't panic. A moment later, the bowl clanged against the patio concrete, like something had nudged it. I strained my eyes, but I saw no shape or outline. I flicked on the outside light. The bowl rocked back and forth, then settled. I couldn't see a single living thing nearby. I rushed outside, my legs shaking, and scanned the yard. The fence gates were locked from the inside, so no one had come in. There was no dog visible. I knelt next to the bowl, touched it, and it felt warm, as if something had just made contact with it. I listened for more sounds, but I only heard my own breathing. A wave of goosebumps spread across my arms. After that, I became nervous about going outside at night. I felt torn between comfort and fear. Part of me liked the idea that Thor was still around in some form, but another part of me felt unsettled by something I couldn't see. I started checking the corners of my backyard every morning. Sometimes I'd find small patches of flattened grass, like an animal had lied down there. Once I found a muddy paw print near the hose. It was the size of Thor's paw print. I pressed my hand against my chest when I saw it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I hadn't watered the yard recently and it hadn't rained, so I couldn't figure out where the mud came from. I bent down, touched the print, and it was still damp. I looked around for other prints, but I only found that single mark. A few days passed quietly. Then one night I lay in bed feeling restless. I kept the window slightly open as usual. Around 1 a.m, I heard a soft whining sound, the kind dogs make when they want attention. It made my skin crawl in a strange way. It sounded so familiar but also out of place. I got up and walked carefully to the window, keeping the lights off in my room. I peeked outside and saw the motion sensor light turn on in the yard. That whining continued for a few seconds, then turned into a low bark. My heart pounded in my ears again. I heard the faint sounds of grass swishing like a dog was running in circles. Then it all went silent. The light clicked off after a minute, leaving me in the dark. I stayed there by the window, every muscle in my body tense. I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I moved to the living room couch and sat there, my knees shaking. I kept thinking about that sound, how it matched exactly the way Thor used to whine when he was thirsty or wanted me to open the door. I tried recording audio from the backyard using my phone, placing it on a patio table. I did this a few times. Each time I heard the barking faintly in the distance, but it never came through clear enough to identify. It sounded muffled, like it was coming from some strange echo. One night I left my phone recording overnight. In the morning I played it back. I listened to a few hours of normal nighttime sounds, crickets chirping, wind rustling leaves, an occasional car driving by. Then, at 12:47 a.m., I heard 3 barks. They were short, but distinct. Right after that, there was a clank, like the water bowl flipping over. My breath caught in my throat as I listened. I rewound that part a few times, but I only got those 3 barks and that clank. No growl, no footsteps, no panting. The next night, I felt a tight knot of dread in my stomach as bedtime approached. My chest felt heavy, and my hands trembled when I turned off the TV. I could already guess what might happen, and I didn't know how to stop it. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water and looked out the window. The moon was bright again, and I could see a clear view of the yard. It was still, but I noticed something that made my heart race. The tall grass near the fence was moving slightly, as if something was brushing against it. There was no wind, and I saw no animal. It just shifted back and forth for a few seconds. Then it was still. I walked to my back door and opened it slowly. A wave of cool air brushed past me. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took a step outside. The porch light was off, so I used a flashlight. I aimed it at the fence. Nothing was there. I aimed it at the water bowl. It looked upright and untouched. I heard my own breathing, fast and shallow. I kept the flashlight pointed ahead as I took a few more steps into the yard. The grass felt cool under my bare feet. Suddenly, I heard a single bark right behind me, so close that I jumped. My skin erupted in goosebumps and I nearly dropped the flashlight. I spun around, shining the beam everywhere. No shape, no dog, just empty yard. But I could still feel the vibration of that bark in my chest. It was strong, exactly like Thor's. I stood there, frozen, trying to steady my breathing. After maybe half a minute, I forced my feet to move. I backed up to the house, never turning my gaze away from the yard. I felt my hands shaking as I reached the door handle. Once I was inside, I locked it and turned on every light in the living room. I sank onto the couch and my heart pounded for a good 5 minutes before it started to slow down. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept hearing faint barks in the distance, and each time my stomach tightened. Even now I feel uneasy talking about it, but this is what's been happening in my backyard. I hear a dog that sounds just like Thor, and I see signs of something moving. I find his old water bowl flipped over sometimes, and I can't explain how it happens. I see the grass bent like a large dog has been lying in the corner. My pulse races whenever I step outside at night, wondering if I'll hear those barks up close again. I don't have a neat ending for this. I don't know why it's happening or if it'll ever stop. All I can say is that I still sense my dog out there. It's comforting in a way, but it also scares me because I can't see anything. That's everything I know. I haven't told many people, but now you've heard it straight from me. If it happens again, I'm not sure what I'll do. But for now, I keep the doors locked at night, and I still jump every time I hear a bark. If it's Thor, I hope he's at peace. If it's something else, I hope it leaves me and my yard alone. Until then, I'll be on edge every time the sun goes down. I still remember how the stale air hit my face the moment I walked inside. The smell reminded me of old metal cabinets and wet walls, and I felt a tightness in my chest before I'd even gone 3 steps. I was alone. My boss had assigned me to check the structural conditions of this abandoned military barracks, shut down since the 1970s. The building was huge. The local officials said it might be repurposed for something else, so they needed an updated report. They picked me because our team was small, and I had some previous experience with older buildings. I never imagined I'd come across anything strange. I was only there to take measurements, capture photos, and note any damage. I stepped into the front hallway and noticed the peeling paint on the walls. The plaster had cracks running in every direction. Most of the windows were boarded up, so the corridor was dim. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and I saw dust particles floating around. The floors were concrete, with chipped spots that exposed the old foundation underneath. At first, my main focus was on the building's condition. I needed to see if there were structural weaknesses, mold damage, or any sign of dangerous materials. I moved forward, taking photos with a small digital camera. Each flash lit up the hallway for a second. When the flash faded, the place looked darker than before. I tried to keep my breathing steady because the air felt heavy. My steps echoed around me because the halls were silent, except for the faint sound of water dripping somewhere. It could have been a leaky pipe or condensation from the ceiling. I made a note on my clipboard. Check plumbing lines. Possible leaks. I walked into the first room on the left. The door was half off its hinges. Rust covered the hinges and knobs. Inside, there were a few scattered chairs, all metal framed with torn seats. An old metal locker stood against one wall, the door slightly ajar. I shined my light inside the locker and found only cobwebs and some bits of paper on the floor. The air smelled like mold and something faintly metallic. I assumed it was the old pipes in the walls or some leftover cleaning solution used decades ago. I spent a few minutes taking pictures from different angles. Then I turned off my camera and moved to the next room. The hallway seemed to get darker as I advanced, though it was the middle of the afternoon outside. My flashlight was strong, but the shadows felt thicker. I told myself it was just the power of suggestion, that old buildings often evoke this kind of unease. Then I heard something. It sounded like a footstep in the corridor behind me. It was just one step, like a heel clicking against the hard floor. I froze and spun around, shining my flashlight. There was no one there, just the same long hallway stretching back toward the entrance. I thought maybe a small piece of debris had fallen from the ceiling, or that my nerves were getting the best of me. I shrugged it off and continued, telling myself to focus on the job. The next few rooms were all empty. Some had old bunk frames and others were just bare. I documented broken windows, rotted wooden frames, and places where water had leaked through the roof. Then, while I was standing in what looked like an old office, I had a sudden urge to turn around. I don't know why, but my stomach tightened, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I swung the flashlight toward the doorway. I saw a shape at the far end of the hallway. It looked like a man in an old military uniform, standing perfectly still. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my throat. I took a step closer, trying to make out the details, but he vanished. It was like he had never been there. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The corridor had that hazy dust in the air, and the lighting was bad. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen someone. I walked out into the hallway and aimed my camera where I'd spotted the figure. I took several photos, hoping maybe the flash would reveal an intruder, or at least reassure me there was nobody there. When I checked the display, I just saw the empty corridor. It made me uneasy. I had no logical explanation for what I'd just seen, but I tried to remain calm. I said to myself, "It's an old building. Sometimes you think you see movement in the corner of your eye. That's all." I continued down the hall, my footsteps echoing. Then I heard another sound, several footsteps in a row, as if someone was marching. They had a steady rhythm, 1-2, 1-2, and it was close enough for me to think someone was right behind me. I spun around again, shining the flashlight every which way. Nothing. I checked every room near me, all empty. My pulse was racing and sweat was forming on my forehead. I wiped it away and decided to keep moving. I wanted to finish as quickly as possible. The tension in my body grew every time I took another photo or scribbled a note. My hands felt clammy on the pen and the flashlight. I kept hearing odd echoes. Sometimes it sounded like distant footsteps, other times like faint whispers. I couldn't tell if it was wind through the corridors or my mind inventing noises. About halfway through the inspection, I walked into a large room that looked like a common area or dining hall. The ceiling was higher there, with old light fixtures dangling by cords. Tables and benches were stacked against the walls. The floor was dusty, and my footsteps stirred up small clouds as I moved. I heard a drip of water somewhere near the far corner. The air felt even heavier in there. I took a few pictures of the cracked beams overhead. Then I heard the marching footsteps again. This time they sounded like they were coming from above, maybe from the second floor. The floor itself vibrated slightly as though someone was really moving in a steady pattern. 1-2, 1-2. I felt a chill creep up my spine. There was no reason for anyone else to be in the building. The place had been locked up for years, and I had the only key from City Hall. Still, the footsteps didn't stop for several seconds, and then they vanished. I rubbed my neck and took a deep breath. I decided to check the second floor because ignoring it would only make me more nervous. The stairwell was narrow with broken steps and a missing handrail in spots. I climbed slowly, one step at a time, shining my flashlight upward. The corners of the stairs were full of dust and spider webs. When I reached the second floor landing, I noticed the hallway was even darker than the one below. Most of the windows had boards or thick curtains that blocked out the light. My flashlight showed me a line of closed doors and more chipped paint. The air was stuffy. I walked to the first door on my right. The handle was stuck, so I pushed it hard. It opened with a loud creak. I panned the flashlight around the room. There were several cots all covered in a layer of dust. Lockers stood against the walls, some with their doors open, others sealed shut by rust. I snapped some pictures and looked at the ceiling for any signs of water damage. Before I could finish, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck again. It was that same feeling of being watched. I turned around and saw the same shadow of a man on the wall near the doorway. My stomach flipped. The shadow didn't have any clear features. It was like the outline of a person's head and shoulders. I tried to shine my flashlight directly on it, but it faded the moment the light hit that section of the wall. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. Then I noticed something else. There was no one standing there to cast that shadow. The hallway behind me was empty. I decided to chase it, or at least see if there was some shape or object creating that silhouette. I stepped into the hallway, pointing my flashlight in every direction. The corridor was quiet, except for my own breathing. I felt a pressure on my chest, like a weight pushing me back. I actually stumbled a bit, as though my body was telling me not to go any further. My hands started shaking, and I gripped my flashlight to steady them. My heart was pounding, but I felt a need to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation. I walked forward, inch by inch, ignoring the tightness in my chest. The corridor seemed to stretch longer the further I went. I reached the spot where I thought the shadow had been. The wall was empty. I saw dusty plaster and some faint stains. No figure, no silhouette. Then I heard a sudden crash behind me. It made me jump and spin around so fast that I nearly dropped the flashlight. One of the lockers in the first room had fallen over. It was flat on the floor. I remembered it was standing upright when I left. I entered the room again, my heart hammering. The locker looked old and heavy, and I couldn't figure out why it would tip over on its own. The windows were sealed, no wind was blowing through, and I hadn't touched it. I tried to prop it back up and realized it was quite heavy. I couldn't do it without straining, and I doubted a slight shift in the floor would have caused that. I stepped back into the hallway and took a few more photos, just to document the area. My nerves were shot by that point. I wanted to finish the inspection, but part of me thought about leaving right then. I still had a job to do, though, so I pushed forward. I checked a few more rooms. Each one was deserted and full of broken furniture. In one room, I found a stack of old newspapers dated from the late 1960s. I took a quick photo for reference, thinking maybe the building's history would matter in my report. I turned a corner and saw another shadow on the wall, shaped like a man standing with his back to me. This time my skin crawled. I tried to step closer, but again I felt that intense pressure on my chest. It was stronger than before, almost like an invisible barrier. I gasped for air, and my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away and the feeling loosened. When I looked at the wall again, the shadow was gone. At that point, I decided I had enough information to at least draft a preliminary report. I headed back down the stairs. On my way out, the corridor felt quieter, but I still sensed that presence, as though it was watching me leave. I heard faint footsteps a couple of times, like a single step or two, but they weren't as pronounced as before. I made a mental note to mention to my boss that the building had some strange acoustics, or at least, that's how I'd explain it. I wasn't ready to say anything else about it. When I reached the front door, I realized I had spent hours inside. It felt like only half that time, but my watch told me otherwise. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and noticed the difference immediately. The air felt lighter. The sunlight felt comforting. My clothes were damp from sweat. I walked a few steps into the parking lot and looked back at the building. The windows seemed dark and lifeless. I couldn't see any movement inside, but I had the feeling that something was in there, watching through the shadows. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I tried to focus on the road, but the images of that shadow and the phantom footsteps stayed with me. By the time I got home, I felt drained. I uploaded the photos to my computer to see if I'd captured anything. All I saw were empty rooms and hallways. Nothing out of the ordinary, except the heavy sense I remembered. Now, as I write my report, I realize I still have more work to do in that building. I need to finalize measurements in some areas, and I have to confirm the condition of the roof on the east wing. That means I'll have to go back. The thought makes my pulse race again. I keep thinking about that uniformed figure I spotted. He looked like an old soldier standing guard at the end of the hall. I know it makes no sense, but part of me believes there's a spirit there, and he doesn't want to be disturbed. I don't know if I'll be ready when I walk through those doors again, but I have no choice. It's my job. I just hope that the next time I can finish the inspection quickly and leave without stirring up whatever's patrolling those halls. If I see that shadow again, I'm not sure how I'll react. My chest tightens just thinking about it. But I have to go back. I need this job, and the city needs that report. That's the simple truth. Still, I don't think I'll ever forget what I heard or saw in that old barracks. I used to feel relaxed riding the subway late at night. It was quiet, and I liked having space to breathe after a long day in the office. That changed the moment I noticed a man who always seemed to be there whenever I stepped onto the last train. He wore a dark jacket and a hat that shadowed his face. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized he appeared on multiple nights, in different cars, but always at the same time, and always in the back. I couldn't ignore that. It felt wrong, like I was being watched even though he kept his head down. Now, every time I enter the subway, my eyes snap to the far corner of the car. I keep expecting to see that figure, that lowered face, those eyes that seemed dull and lifeless. I'm a 31-year-old guy working in downtown. My shifts can run late, and sometimes I don't leave until 10 or 11 at night. That puts me on a near-empty train for 20 minutes, sometimes 30, depending on delays. The city isn't always safe after midnight, so I used to appreciate the subdued atmosphere of the last train. But about 3 weeks ago, I caught sight of this man in the far seat. He had a heavy black coat, possibly wool, and a hat with a low brim. It was dark, maybe gray or black, and he kept it tilted forward so I could only see part of his face. His skin looked pale, and his posture was stiff. The first time I saw him, I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just a tired commuter. But then, I noticed he was there again 2 nights later. Same spot, same coat, same hat, same rigid posture. He never made eye contact, never looked around, never shifted in his seat like most people do on a long ride. It gave me a weird feeling, but I told myself I was overreacting. People have routines. Maybe he worked a shift that ended around the same time as mine. A few days later, I saw him again. This time, the train car had only 3 people. Me, an older man reading a newspaper, and him. The older man got off after a few stops, leaving just me and the stranger. I tried to focus on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting toward the back of the car. He stayed motionless, hands in his lap, head slightly lowered. I could see a bit more of his face under the overhead lights. His skin looked almost colorless, and I couldn't tell if he was breathing. Usually you can see a slight rise and fall in someone's chest or hear them shift in their seat. But he seemed too still. My heart thudded in my chest and my mouth went dry. I told myself to calm down. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was just there. After a few more stops, I stood up to get off. My station is a minor one, not a major transfer point, so usually only a few people step off there late at night. I expected him to stay because I hadn't seen him move the entire ride. But as soon as the train doors opened at my station, I heard footsteps behind me. They were quick and sounded heavier than I expected. I felt my pulse pound faster. I tried to act normal and keep walking, but I glanced over my shoulder. He was there, stepping onto the platform, head still tilted forward. I hurried up the steps toward the exit. The station was nearly empty, and the overhead lights gave everything a pale, flickering look. When I turned around again, I couldn't see him. I scanned the platform, but he was gone. My body felt tense, and I was sweating despite the chilly air. I hurried home, looking behind me more times than I want to admit. The next morning, I told a coworker about the weird guy. My coworker joked, Maybe he's just some random dude with a bad fashion sense. You're freaking yourself out for no reason. I tried to laugh it off and focus on my tasks. But that night I had to stay even later. I caught the last train at around 11:30 p.m. I got on, and for the first few stops, the car was empty. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd made it all up in my head. Then, halfway through the ride, I glanced to the far end. He was there again, seated in the same corner, same hat, same coat, head down. My stomach tightened. I gripped the edge of my seat. The train rattled through the tunnels and I could hear the squeak of the metal rails echoing. I tried to steady my breathing. I didn't look his way for a while, but I felt like his head turned slightly in my direction. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the dark window in front of me. I could see my reflection. Sweaty forehead, wide eyes, clenched jaw. I told myself to keep it together. After a few minutes, I stood up to wait by the doors because my stop was coming up. The overhead speakers announced the station, and I hopped out as soon as the doors slid open. I took 2 steps onto the platform and listened. I heard footsteps behind me again. They were soft this time, almost hesitant. I spun around. He stood on the platform looking right at me. I could see his eyes under the brim of the hat. They looked dull, grayish, almost like there was no light reflecting in them. He didn't speak. My chest felt tight, and I broke into a fast walk toward the exit. By the time I reached the turnstiles, he wasn't there. I spent the entire walk home checking behind me. I felt jumpy, like I expected him to pop out around every corner. The next day at work, I searched online for any references to a mysterious passenger or strange subway sightings. I found a forum post from years back. A guy mentioned a man in a dark coat and hat who appeared on nearly empty trains late at night. The post was from someone claiming they saw him around my station, but there were no replies. I found another thread discussing eerie things on public transportation, but most of it was people telling ghost stories or sharing urban legends. There was one reply that said, "I've heard about the man with no light in his eyes. If you see him often, it's a bad sign." That was it. No one gave details. At work, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a rumor or some local urban legend, but I couldn't ignore that I'd seen something very similar. I started to wonder if I should switch lines or get off at a different station and walk. But that would be a longer route at night. I also considered that it might be a real person who was just messing with people. Maybe he noticed me noticing him and decided to scare me. Either way, I felt uneasy. The following night, I decided to record a video if I saw him. I got on the train around 10:45 p.m. The car had a few people in it, a woman with headphones, a guy in a suit, and a couple who looked half asleep. I scanned the seats and saw no sign of the man in the hat. The train left the station and I felt a small sense of relief. But a few stops later, the couple left, and the guy in the suit switched cars. The woman with headphones dozed off. I was alone except for her. My nerves were on edge. My phone was in my hand, camera app open, ready to start recording. Every flicker of the overhead lights made my heart jump. Then, in the reflection of the door window, I saw him stand up in the far corner. I didn't even hear him come in. He must have boarded at a previous station when I wasn't looking. He was there, wearing that same coat, hat tilted forward. My hands shook, and I tried to hold my phone steady. I tapped the record button. I couldn't bring myself to turn around directly, so I aimed my phone behind me. The reflection in the door showed me his figure. The train lights flickered again, and for a second, I thought I saw his eyes in the reflection. They looked gray and flat, like worn-out stones. He took one step toward me, then another. The woman with the headphones kept sleeping, unaware of anything happening. My breathing turned shallow. My throat tightened. My legs felt locked in place. I knew I should step off at the next station, but that was still a couple of minutes away. The train rocked and the overhead lights flickered more. I kept the phone raised, still recording. His steps were slow and deliberate. I heard them on the metal floor. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to turn around. I saw his face more clearly than ever. His skin wasn't just pale, it looked almost translucent, like he hadn't been in the sun for months. His eyes had no reflection. Usually in a bright train car you see some glint of light in a person's eyes. He had none. His lips were parted slightly, but he made no sound. My knees felt weak, and my stomach churned. I pressed the emergency button next to the door, hoping an alarm would go off or a conductor would come. Nothing happened. Maybe it was broken, or maybe it doesn't function that way on this older train. I was alone with him, and the woman who slept through everything. I took a few steps backward, heart hammering. Then the train pulled into the next station. I rushed out through the opening doors. I whipped around, expecting him to follow, but the doors slid shut. I saw him inside, just staring in my direction. The train pulled away and he vanished into the tunnel. I exhaled and realized I was sweating so much my shirt stuck to my back. My phone was still in my hand, recording. I stopped the recording and hurried out of the station. I felt the cool night air hit my face and it helped steady me a bit. I checked the video later in my apartment, but it showed nothing except an empty seat behind me. The reflection I thought I saw was gone. He didn't appear on camera. There was no audio, no footsteps, no flicker of movement. It was like I had recorded an empty train car. Over the next few days, I rode the subway with my phone always ready. Sometimes I wouldn't see him at all. Other times he would show up and sit at the far end, not moving or making a sound. I tried to capture some proof or show a coworker so they'd believe me. But every time I recorded, I got nothing but empty seats or fuzzy frames. It was starting to wear on me. I wasn't sleeping well because every time I closed my eyes, I pictured his lifeless gaze. One night I left work around midnight. I decided to take an alternate route that involved a short walk through a busier street. The walk took me about 15 minutes out of my way. I got on a different subway line, hoping it would help. The car was mostly empty, just a few people scattered around. The doors closed and I settled into a seat, relieved that I didn't see the man anywhere. Then, at the next station, the doors opened. A few people got off and a tall figure wearing a dark coat stepped on. He kept his head down, hat covering most of his face. My chest tightened. He took a seat at the opposite end, but I knew it was him. He didn't look at me, but I felt a cold sensation in my chest, like a jolt of pure fear. I got off 2 stops early. I stood on the platform listening for any sign of him. The train pulled away and I saw him through the window. He was standing by the doors staring out at me from inside the car. I caught the shape of his eyes again. They still had that dim, colorless quality. He raised his hand slightly as though he was acknowledging me. Then he disappeared as the train moved on. When I finally made it home, I locked my door and double-checked all the windows. My breathing was rapid, and my muscles ached from tension. I realized I'd been clenching my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I got a glass of water and just stood there in the kitchen, thinking about what to do. Should I talk to the subway attendants? Report him to the police? But what would I say? That a guy with weird eyes keeps showing up on my train? That I recorded him but he doesn't appear on camera? It sounded crazy. I didn't even have a clear name or face. Just a strange silhouette and those eyes. Now, every night, I scan each subway car before I step in. I check the corners first. If I see a tall figure in a dark coat and hat, I'll switch cars. If I see him in multiple cars, I might even consider taking a taxi, despite the cost. Sometimes I ride the train home without seeing him at all. Other times I spot him at the last second, or realize he's been sitting behind me for a few stops. I can't explain how he always manages to get on without me noticing. I can't explain how he disappears so fast when I get off. It's been almost a month of this. I haven't told my friends or family much about it, other than vague comments about a strange passenger. They assume it's just a random commuter who looks creepy. But I can't shake this feeling of dread every time I enter the station. I feel the hairs on my arms stand on end when the train doors open and I step inside. I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen, but it never does. He just sits there or follows me off the train and then he's gone. I don't know if he's real in the normal sense. Maybe he's just an ordinary guy with a weird presence. Or maybe he's something else that I can't wrap my head around. All I know is that late at night when I step into a near-empty subway car, I look straight to the back. If I see him, my heart races. If I don't see him, I feel a strange mix of relief and paranoia, because I wonder if he's going to slip in at the next stop. No matter what, I can't relax on those rides anymore. That sense of safety is gone. I still check that old forum thread sometimes, hoping someone else will post about the man with no reflection in his eyes. No updates so far. No one has answered my attempts to bring it up. It's like nobody else is experiencing this, or maybe they just think it's a joke. Meanwhile, I can't escape the tension. Every time I ride, I feel my pulse spike. Every time I get off, I whip my head around, listening for those footsteps. The nights are longer now. My routine has changed. I walk faster, I avoid certain cars, and I don't stay out too late if I can help it. This is my life now. Watching the corners of empty train cars, scanning station platforms, and trying to keep my mind in check when I see that pale face with those vacant eyes. I haven't seen him do anything violent or speak a single word. He just exists in my peripheral vision, stepping on and off trains, vanishing at my station, and leaving me with chills. I don't know where it ends. I just know that every night when I head to the subway, my stomach tightens, and I force myself to walk inside, half expecting to see him in that corner seat, wearing his dark coat and hat, waiting for me to notice him again. And every time, I wonder if tonight will be different, or if I'll just keep living in this uneasy loop with that silent passenger in the shadows. I never expected a quiet afternoon at home to turn into a series of strange moments that still unsettle me. I'm usually focused on my tasks, clicking through documents and answering emails without paying much attention to the rest of the house. That day, everything changed when I heard a sharp cracking sound somewhere behind my office door. My heart jumped, and I instinctively paused to listen. The first thought in my mind was that maybe something fell. I hoped it wasn't my coffee mug or my desk lamp, but I had a feeling it came from farther away, probably out in the hallway. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. I'm 36 years old, and I work from home in a small office set up in one of the spare rooms. It's a solid, isolated space. I chose that room because it's quiet, and I don't get many distractions. That afternoon, I was buried in spreadsheets and chat messages when that sound cut through my concentration. It was like a short snap, not too loud, but loud enough to get my attention. I got up from my desk chair, pushed it back, and walked out into the hallway. The hallway light was off, but the sunlight from the living room window kept things bright enough. I saw something on the floor near the side wall. At first, I didn't recognize what had fallen. I approached slowly, trying not to step on any broken glass if there was any. When I got close, I realized it was a framed photo of me and my dad. The photo had a glass cover, and it was definitely broken. There were small shards scattered around. I saw the largest chunk of glass still stuck in the frame, but it had a long crack running across it. The edge of the frame was split too, like it had taken a pretty hard hit. I checked the wall to see if the nail was loose, because sometimes nails slip and frames fall off. But the nail was still in there, solid. I tested it by wiggling it with my fingers. It didn't budge. The hanger on the back of the frame was intact too. I couldn't figure out how this frame ended up on the ground when the nail was still secure. I stayed there for a moment, trying to come up with a logical explanation. I thought maybe there was a vibration from outside or the frame was put up incorrectly, but I had hung that photo months ago. It never seemed unstable. I picked up the photo carefully, brushed off some glass, and set it aside. As I looked at the picture, I felt a little sting of sadness. My dad passed away a while back, and I keep that photo around as a reminder of the good times we had. Seeing it broken on the floor made my chest feel tight. I decided I'd replace the frame later, so I took the broken one and set it against the hallway wall. Then, I went to get a broom, dustpan, and a small trash bag to clean up the shards. I tried to forget about it and get back to work, But I'll be honest, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. There was something off about the way that frame just fell for no reason. For a couple of days, everything was normal. I patched up the broken photo frame with some tape so the picture wouldn't slide out, planning to buy a new frame soon. I got back into my routine of waking up, grabbing coffee, and heading into my office for the usual grind. I forgot about the strange incident, or at least I pushed it out of my mind. Then a few days later, I heard another sharp sound. It was the same kind of quick snap or crack, like something hitting a hard surface. This time, I wasn't in a call or buried in work. I heard it right when I was about to get up to grab lunch. I walked into the hallway again, and I saw another frame on the floor. This frame wasn't related to my dad at all. It was just some generic art print I found online, something I liked because it had cool shapes and colors. This time the glass wasn't shattered, but the frame was definitely cracked at one corner. Again I checked the nail, and again I found it was still firmly in place. The hanger on the back of the frame wasn't broken, it made no sense. I stood there, feeling a weird mix of confusion and irritation. I felt the same nervous energy rising in my chest. I couldn't figure out a reason for these frames to fall, especially two in such a short span of time. I was picking it up off the floor when I felt this strange sensation behind me. It was like someone walked past in the hallway, brushing my shoulder lightly. I swear I felt a quick movement in the air, and I got a sudden chill that spread over the back of my neck. My hair stood up, and I froze. I looked around, but there was nobody there. My house was empty. I just stood still, trying to steady my breathing. I tried telling myself it was the breeze from somewhere, but I knew the windows were shut. I don't keep them open during the day, especially in that hallway. I shook it off and carried the frame into my office, deciding I'd repair it if I could or just toss it. My mind was busy with all sorts of thoughts. I wondered if something was messing with me. Maybe the house had some structural issue causing the frames to slip. But the nails were secure, and the frames didn't seem like they had any obvious damage before they fell. The entire thing was unsettling. That night, I stayed up late to finish some work. My office has only one small window, and at night it gets pretty dark. I rely on the overhead light and a desk lamp. When I get deep into a project, I sometimes forget how late it is. Around 1 a.m. And I noticed I was getting some glare on my computer screen from the overhead light, so I turned it off, leaving only the desk lamp on. The screen was easier to read that way, but the rest of the room was in shadows. I was typing up notes when I noticed a flicker on my monitor. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. But then, I saw what looked like a quick reflection on the screen. It was like a faint outline of a person standing behind me. My stomach clenched and I spun around, but there was only the empty office. I can't emphasize enough how real it looked in that moment. I didn't see details of a face, but I caught a human-shaped reflection. My pulse started pounding, and I felt a light sweat break out along my temples. I tapped the desk lamp to see if maybe the bulb was flickering. It was steady. I looked around the office, checking the corners. Nothing unusual. So I tried to laugh it off and told myself I was just tired. Maybe I was spooked from the weird frame incidents. I tried to keep working, but every so often I saw the same flicker, and each time, I felt that uneasy tingle at the back of my neck. Finally, I gave up on working for the night. I saved my files, closed my computer, and leaned back in my chair. I sat there in the dark for a second, breathing slowly. I was trying to calm down and remind myself that it's an old house and weird things happen, but I couldn't shake the paranoia. I locked the office door on my way out, even though I've never done that before. I walked around the house, flipping on lights, checking each room to make sure no one was there. It felt silly, but I couldn't help it. I felt on edge. I didn't sleep well that night. I dreamed about hearing more frames dropping or footsteps in the hallway. In the morning, I woke up groggy, with a stiff neck from tossing and turning. I tried to start my routine as usual, made a strong cup of coffee, and checked my emails on my phone. The house felt normal in daylight, so I told myself to forget about the weird stuff. But as soon as I walked into my office, I felt uncomfortable again. The air felt thick. The office doesn't have the best ventilation, so maybe it was just stuffy in there. But it felt different, like I was walking into someone else's space. I spent the day trying to ignore it and focus on my tasks. I had a couple of virtual meetings. I answered some phone calls. Everything seemed normal enough, except I kept glancing over my shoulder. I tried rearranging a few things in the office, thinking maybe a fresh setup would help me feel better. I moved a shelf, reorganized some books, and set the broken frames aside. I kept the photo of me and my dad on the desk, leaning against the wall so I wouldn't forget to replace the frame. While I was doing this mini redecoration, I heard a faint creak by the door. It wasn't a footstep, more like the wood panel near the door just flexed, the way it does when someone steps on it. I paused and looked at the spot. It was a clear day, no chance of the house settling or anything like that. I moved to that part of the floor and pressed down. It didn't make the same sound. My heart rate kicked up again, and I got that familiar feeling of being watched. I exhaled and told myself to calm down. I decided to take a break and leave the office. I went into the kitchen and stared out the window for a while, sipping water and trying to convince myself I was just spooked. The rest of that afternoon passed without any more noises. By the time evening rolled around, I was feeling a bit better. The sun was setting and I was sitting in my living room with a movie playing on TV. I started to think maybe it was just my imagination amplifying some small noises. I felt foolish for letting it get under my skin. Around 9 p.m., I walked back to the office to shut down my computer. I always do a quick check before bed just to make sure I don't have any urgent emails. As soon as I opened the office door, I noticed the desk lamp was on. I was sure I turned it off earlier. I remembered flipping the switch because I always worry about leaving lights on. I stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, feeling my chest tighten. I scanned the room to see if anything else was off. My desk chair was slightly pulled out, like someone had been sitting there. The thick feeling in the air was back. I don't know how to describe it in any fancy terms. It just felt heavy. My skin started tingling again, and my breath came in short bursts. I checked the windows to see if someone broke in. They were locked from the inside. Nothing was missing. Nothing else was moved, as far as I could tell. But the desk lamp was on, and the chair was shifted. I didn't have a good explanation for it. I walked over to the desk, turned off the lamp, and pushed the chair in. Then I realized that my dad's photo, which was leaning against the wall on my desk, had moved to the edge. It was almost at the corner where it could have easily fallen off. I hadn't left it that way. I remembered placing it more toward the center. I picked it up, held it for a second, and felt a tightness in my throat. I stood there, mentally asking my dad if he was trying to tell me something. I whispered, "Dad, if this is you, I don't understand what you want." My voice sounded shaky. I waited for a few seconds, but I didn't hear anything. I felt silly talking out loud to an empty room, but I had to do something to ease my nerves. I set the photo back in the middle of the desk, turned around, and left the room, shutting the door behind me. This time, I didn't lock it. I just went to the living room and sat down, feeling drained. The next few nights were similar. Every time I stayed up late, I saw those flickers on the screen or felt movement behind me. Sometimes I heard the soft creak on the floor. Other nights it was quiet, and I'd start to think the weird phase was over. Then I'd notice a faint reflection on my computer screen again, and my gut would twist. I still have no concrete proof of what's going on, only these experiences that feel too real to dismiss as coincidence. I can't ignore that all of this started when the photo of me and my dad fell and shattered. But I don't want to jump to conclusions. For all I know, it could be something else entirely. All I can say for certain is that my office doesn't feel the same. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, checking if something moved, if a frame is tilting on the wall, or if I'll hear that unsettling crack again. Part of me hopes it's my dad trying to reach me, because at least that would feel comforting in some way. But there's this nagging feeling that maybe it's something else. I can't explain it in a neat way. It's just an undercurrent of tension, like I'm sharing the room with a presence that's not quite friendly but not exactly threatening either. It's just there. I've considered the possibility of calling someone to check the walls or the nails, But I know that won't explain why I keep seeing that shape in the monitor reflection, or why the lamp was turned on by itself, or why I felt someone pass behind me when I was in the hallway. I don't have a solid plan. For now, I'm just living with it. I still work in that office because I have to. Life goes on, and I have deadlines to meet and bills to pay. But every time I open that door, my stomach tightens, and I wonder if I'll find something else out of place. That's where I stand right now. I wish I had a final answer or a big confrontation to share, but I don't. All I have is this unsettling feeling that I'm not alone when I sit at my desk. I hear the faint creaks. I sense the flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, and I see the reflection of something behind me on my computer screen. Whether it's my dad or another presence using those fallen frames to reach me, I can't say. But I'm not dismissing it anymore. I'm paying attention, even though it scares me. If there's a message, I hope it becomes clearer soon. Until then, I'll keep one eye on my work and another on whatever's going on behind me. I never thought I would dread a quiet night at home. The first few days in this furnished house felt ordinary. I was tired from the move, focused on unpacking my clothes and settling into a new job. The living room couch was worn out but comfortable enough. The kitchen had basic utensils. There was an odd little door in the hallway ceiling that led to a small attic. It was easy to ignore at first. I was more worried about getting used to my new bedroom, which had a musty smell that wouldn't go away even with the windows open all day. On my first night, I tried to relax in front of the TV. My head was spinning from all the changes in my life. I ate a quick dinner of microwave pasta and sat there, letting the cheap overhead light buzz above me. Around midnight, I shut off the TV and headed to my room. I was half asleep when I heard something creak above me. It was subtle, like a soft scraping sound. It stopped as soon as I focused on it, so I shrugged and rolled over. The next night I heard it again. This time it sounded like faint footsteps. They were light and spaced out, like someone trying not to be heard. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Then everything went silent. I thought about that attic door in the hallway. It was right outside my bedroom in the ceiling, with a small ring handle to pull it down. I told myself it was probably the house settling or some small animal moving around up there. I managed to fall asleep after a while, though my nerves were on edge. By the end of the first week, I couldn't ignore the noises. They always came around midnight, sometimes a bit later. There would be several soft steps, and once I even heard what sounded like a low chuckle. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or the pipes. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to check that attic. I found an old folding ladder in the garage. It was a bit too short, so I had to stand on the top rung, stretching to open the attic door. I pushed it up, my arms trembling from the awkward angle. I poked my head through the opening. A musty smell of stale air, dust, and something else, maybe old fabric or paper, hit me. Light from the hallway lamp only reached a few feet in, so I turned on the flashlight on my phone. I saw a cluster of boxes. They were all covered in dust and labeled with vague words like toys or misc. I approached them, feeling my skin crawl with each step. The floor creaked under my weight. I half expected something to jump out from behind a box, but nothing moved. I opened one box. Inside, I saw old stuffed animals, bears, a few rabbits, and something that looked like a clown doll, but with half its face rubbed off. Another box had cracked dolls with porcelain faces, their glass eyes either missing or loose. I felt uneasy, but there was nothing alive or moving. It was just a bunch of neglected junk. I shut the boxes, backed toward the attic door, and carefully climbed down. I locked the attic door, pushing it up as tightly as it would go. I told myself I'd sleep better knowing exactly what was up there. That night I woke up to the same faint footsteps. My stomach twisted into a knot. I looked at my ceiling, imagining something pacing around just a few feet above me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. Eventually, the noises stopped and I drifted off. but my mind wouldn't let go of the idea that something was up there. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a routine of ignoring the sounds as best as I could. I told myself it was nothing. Sometimes I'd stay up late with the TV on loud to distract myself. Other times I'd sleep with headphones playing music to drown out the attic. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I noticed little details that made me uneasy. The hallway below the attic door always felt a bit colder. The door itself looked crooked some mornings, like it had been jostled. A few times I found the ring handle in a different position, but I convinced myself that was just my imagination. One night, something changed. I was dozing off when I heard a gentle thump on the attic door. It sounded like someone knocking lightly from inside. I jolted upright in bed, adrenaline flooding my veins. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at the ceiling. Another knock came, followed by a scraping sound as if the door was pushed up an inch and then dropped back in place. I didn't move. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, and my heart pounded so fast it hurt. In that moment, I wanted to scream, but I just lay there. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. I turned on my lamp, feeling my hand tremble on the switch. I barely slept. The next morning, I stood under that attic door, staring at it. I had a stinging scratch on my back where I'd twisted around in bed during the night. It hurt whenever I moved. I felt this overwhelming dread at the idea of pulling that ladder out again. I didn't want to see if the boxes had been moved or if something was waiting up there. I ran through all the possibilities in my head. Could it be some wild animal? Could someone be secretly living up there? The house was old, and I didn't know its history. Maybe a previous tenant forgot to mention something, but I'd seen no evidence of a person, just dusty boxes and old toys. Despite my fear, I forced myself to check the attic again. I did it on a Sunday afternoon when the sun was high and the house felt brighter. I set up my ladder, climbed up, and pushed the door open. This time I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, making my stomach churn. I peeked inside and saw the boxes in the same position as before. The musty smell was still there. I moved farther inside, shining my flashlight on the floor and walls. Dust motes floated in the beam of light. My breathing felt heavy. Each time the attic floor creaked, my heart rate jumped. I opened one of the toy boxes again. The stuffed animals were in the same spot, but I noticed one of the smaller bears on top looked different. Its head was turned to the side, staring toward the attic door. That made my blood run cold. I wasn't sure if I was remembering its position incorrectly, or if it had somehow moved. I backed away, keeping my eyes on that bear. I checked the other boxes. The creepy porcelain dolls were also in the same box, though one seemed to be missing a hand that I could have sworn was there before. My stomach tightened. I couldn't handle being there anymore. I hurried back, climbed down the ladder, and shut the door. My fingers were shaking so much that I almost slipped off the last rung. At night, the knocking continued. Sometimes it was just one faint tap. Other times it sounded like a slow, deliberate series of knocks, spaced out by several seconds. Each time I felt my throat tighten. The pain in my back got worse because I kept jolting awake and twisting. I tried to cover the attic door with tape around the edges, hoping it would at least keep it from opening. The next morning I found the tape peeled back on one side, as if pried from within. My hands were cold when I discovered that. I almost walked out and left the house for good, but I had nowhere else to go. I started sleeping in the living room, curled up on the couch. The footsteps still echoed above me, though they seemed more distant there. But that night I felt a thud vibrate through the living room ceiling. It was a heavy impact, like a box dropping or someone jumping. I shot up from the couch, heart hammering, and stared at the ceiling. Silence followed. My skin tingled and I realized I was sweating. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? I think there's a ghost or a mysterious intruder in my attic who moves toys around. They'd think I was nuts. A few days later, I started noticing small items around the house were out of place. A framed picture of the previous tenant, an older photo that came with the furniture, was tilted. My coffee mug was on the table when I remembered leaving it by the sink. The sense of not being alone grew stronger each day. I'd walk into a room and feel a chill like a draft crossing my skin. I heard faint movements behind the walls. The heating and cooling system wasn't new, so I tried blaming it on that. But deep down, I knew it was something else. One night, I dreamed that the attic door opened on its own. In my dream, I could see a shape leaning out, looking down at me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I stared at the dark hallway, half expecting to see the door hanging open. It was shut, but I couldn't bring myself to go check. I lay awake until sunrise, every muscle tense. I had to do something. I decided to clear out the attic entirely. I thought if I removed those old boxes and maybe threw them away, the noise might stop. One Saturday morning, I forced myself up there again. I wore a thick hoodie, jeans, and gloves. I grabbed a stack of empty trash bags. My plan was to bag everything up and leave it on the curb. As I entered the attic, the silence pressed down on me. My breath sounded too loud. I began with the box of stuffed animals, shoving them into a bag, one by one. Some of them were missing eyes, others had torn limbs. They smelled musty and felt sticky with age. I moved to the dolls. Their blank stares made me shiver, but I threw them in without hesitation. Their porcelain faces clinked against each other. It made a sharp noise that echoed in the small space. I didn't like the way their eyes seemed to glisten in the flashlight beam. I glanced at each box. They were mostly filled with old board games, broken plastic toys, and random bits of clothing. I worked fast, my legs trembling each time the floor creaked. Suddenly, the attic door shifted behind me. I heard the scraping noise again. My heart pounded in my ears. I whipped around, shining my flashlight. The door was still closed, but it had moved slightly, letting in a bit more light. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. I stuffed the last toy into a bag, tied it tight, and dragged it to the opening. It was heavier than I expected. I huffed and shoved it onto the hallway floor below. While I was moving the second bag, I heard a soft, shuffling sound from the corner of the attic. My breath caught. I froze. I pointed my flashlight at the corner, but I saw nothing. Just more dusty floorboards. My forehead was damp with sweat, and my pulse hammered at my temples. I had to finish. I grabbed the second bag, dumped in the last few items, and hurried to the door. I climbed down, nearly slipping on the ladder, and pushed the attic door shut behind me. I pressed against it until I heard it latch. Then I stood there, heart racing, leaning against the wall. I felt relief mixed with lingering dread. I carried those trash bags outside, tossing them near the sidewalk. The sun was shining, and the day felt too normal for what I had just gone through. My arms were shaking. I went back in, took a shower, and tried to calm down. That night, I waited for the usual sounds. Nothing happened. I went to bed in my own room for the first time in days, my body tense. I expected footsteps or knocks, but there was only silence. A week passed without incident. I still felt uneasy in that hallway. I kept looking up at the attic door, worried it might pop open, but it never did. I slept better each night, though I stayed on guard. In the mornings, I'd check the tape I'd placed around the edges of the door. It stayed intact. I started thinking that maybe clearing out those creepy old boxes was enough. Maybe whatever was tied to them was gone. I tried not to think too hard about it. I didn't want to dwell on what caused those footsteps or the light knocking. I just wanted to feel safe again. Now, I still live here. I haven't heard anything from the attic in a while. Sometimes, when I pass by that hallway door, I feel a twinge in my gut. My back still has a thin scar from where I scratched it, a reminder of those tense nights. I don't go up there anymore. The attic's empty, and I prefer to keep it that way. I don't want to question whether any of those toys have come back, or if there's something else hiding in a corner. The house is quiet now, and that's all I need. If anything knocks on that door again, I'm not sure I'll have the courage to check. But for now, I sleep through the night, and I try not to look at the ceiling unless I absolutely have to. I never felt real fear until I stepped into that forest last night. I thought I understood what it meant to be alone, but I was wrong. I went there expecting a peaceful walk through an isolated trail. I had done similar hikes many times, always looking for places with no crowds and no distractions. I liked the idea of hearing nothing but leaves under my boots. That night, though, I discovered something I didn't expect, and I haven't been the same since. I parked my car on a dirt patch near the entrance. There was no sign, just a narrow pathway disappearing between dark trunks. I grabbed my flashlight, took a water bottle, and made sure my backpack was zipped. I started walking around 7 in the evening. The sun had already sunk behind the hills, leaving a thin layer of pale light that slipped away fast. I followed the path, noticing how quiet everything felt. There weren't any chirping insects, no distant animal calls. It was like the place was in hiding. I moved forward, keeping my eyes on the ground so I wouldn't trip over roots or stones. The ground was uneven, covered in damp leaves and patches of mud. The scent of wet earth hit my nose. My boots squished in a few spots, but I kept going at a slow pace. After a while, I decided to click on my flashlight. The beam didn't cut very far because of the fog that had settled in. It wasn't thick like a wall, but it drifted around the trunks and over the ground in wispy layers. When I pointed my light forward, I saw the swirl of fog shifting like a curtain. Somewhere ahead, a tree creaked. It sounded like an old door hinge that needed oil. I paused and listened for a moment. I heard a slight rustle like something brushing against branches. I swept the flashlight around. I saw large trunks on both sides. The bark looked damp and rough. The branches twisted in weird angles, some bending low to the ground, some sticking out like broken arms. I felt a chill on my neck, but I couldn't tell if it was the breeze or just nerves. I kept walking. My breathing got heavier. The air felt colder than I expected for that time of year. My jacket wasn't thick, but I zipped it up and stuffed my free hand in my pocket. I tried to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. I looked up at the canopy. The branches were so dense that I barely saw the sky. The fog made it worse. Every time I looked up, I saw shapes that looked like faces or figures, but I shrugged it off as my imagination. After about 30 minutes, I noticed something moving to my left. I flicked my flashlight in that direction. I didn't see anything, but I knew I had seen a shape there, standing between two trunks. It was tall, dark, and it ducked out of sight the second I tried to focus on it. I felt my pulse spike. My hands felt clammy. I listened hard, but there was no sound besides a faint breeze sweeping over leaves. I decided to keep going. I told myself it was probably a deer, or maybe just a trick of the light. My legs trembled a bit, but I forced myself to take calm steps. With each step, I felt the ground sucking on my boots. The mud made little popping noises when I lifted my feet. Then I smelled something stale, like rotten wood. It got stronger as I went deeper into the forest. It was a nauseating mix of old vegetation and standing water. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but it didn't help much. I reached a section where the trees grew closer together. The trunks formed a sort of corridor. I had to duck under some low branches that almost looked like arms grabbing at me. Whenever I nudged one aside, it sprang back with a soft whoosh. I kept glancing over my shoulder because it felt like someone was behind me. I saw only my own footprints in the shadows from my flashlight. That's when I heard what sounded like my name. It was a soft whisper. It didn't echo. It just slipped through the air and died. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. I held my breath and listened. At first, nothing happened. Then I heard it again, the same low murmur. I spun around fast, shining the flashlight in every direction. I shouted, "Is anyone there?" My voice came out shaky. I waited for an answer. Nothing. The forest absorbed the sound in a second or two. I realized how small I felt. The trees seemed taller. The path behind me looked narrower. I forced myself to move. I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to panic. I had been in tense situations before during hikes. Sometimes animals or my own tired mind played tricks on me. I told myself that must be the case. I tried to focus on my breathing. In, out, Out. Every few steps, though, I glanced to the side. I kept thinking I saw flickers of movement behind the trunks or near the bushes. I'd catch a glimpse of something stepping out of sight. At one point, I thought I saw a pale shape on a branch, but it vanished when I looked directly at it. The wind started to pick up. It made a low howl, passing through the branches like a whistle. The branches rattled together, making a clacking sound. Some leaves fluttered across the trail, brushing against my legs. My flashlight started to flicker. I tapped it a few times until it stabilized. Then I saw a shape ahead. It was just a silhouette standing still in the middle of the path. I froze in place. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. My mouth went dry. I wanted to call out, but my voice got stuck. I took one step forward. The silhouette drifted to the side and disappeared into the trees. I heard a soft rustling of leaves, and then it was gone. I stayed there, trying to decide if I should keep going or turn around. The path behind me seemed even darker now. Going back felt just as unsettling as going forward. My gut told me to keep moving, so I did. As I passed the spot where I saw that shape, I scanned the trees on both sides. I saw nothing except black trunks and wet underbrush. The fog circled my ankles, thickening around me. My flashlight revealed small droplets of moisture in the air. My breathing sounded loud to my own ears. I heard the pounding of my heart. My legs started to feel heavy, like I was fighting gravity. The deeper I went, the more I felt that the forest was closing in. The path seemed narrower. Branches brushed my shoulders. Moss dangled from the higher limbs like clumps of hair. The smell of rot intensified. I spotted mushrooms clinging to the base of some trunks. They looked pale and bulbous. I tried not to step on them because they seemed swollen and easy to burst. I caught myself muttering, "This place is messed up." My voice sounded odd in the silence. I realized I was talking just to fill the emptiness. My breath came out in short bursts. My stomach was tense. The hair on my arms stood on end. I clenched the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. Then the wind blew again, making the trees sway. The creaking got louder, almost like moaning. I heard a crunch behind me. I whipped around and pointed the light. I saw only a cluster of ferns, but I could have sworn something moved there. My pulse pounded in my throat. I took a step toward that spot, shining the beam slowly from left to right. Nothing moved. I was sure I had heard a footstep. The sound was too heavy to be just a branch falling or a small animal scurrying. I stood still, waiting. The silence stretched out. The only sound was the wind fading away. I decided I had to pick up the pace. I started walking faster, almost jogging. My boots smacked the dirt and leaves, sending echoes around me. My chest tightened with each step. My ears rang with the sound of my own footfalls. When I looked up, I saw the twisted branches overhead. They seemed to shift whenever my flashlight beam moved. At times, I thought I saw them forming shapes that resembled faces with open mouths, but I refused to stare too long. I heard another whisper of my name, this time from the right. My skin prickled. I mumbled to myself, "That's not real. That's not real." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was calling me. Then I heard it again, closer. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my temples. My stomach cramped with tension. I turned my flashlight in that direction, but the beam landed on thick undergrowth. There was a break in the bushes just wide enough for something to stand behind them. I tried to see if there were footprints, but the leaves and mud made it impossible to tell. I remember thinking, I need to get out of here. I turned back to the path and started moving faster. My breath came in gasps. My lungs felt cold with each inhale. The gloom made it hard to see any further than a few yards, even with the flashlight. The trail itself looked more like a series of small clearings between the trees. Every time I found a clearer space, I saw shapes sliding away at the edges of my vision. I couldn't make out faces or clothes, just outlines that didn't match the trees or the ground. After a while, I noticed a change in the air. The wind stopped. The silence wrapped around me so hard that I could hear my heartbeat. I slowed down, worried that if I made too much noise, something would jump out. I stepped carefully over roots. My back tensed up. My shoulders ached from the stress. I kept swallowing because my mouth felt so dry. Then the path curved and I saw a fallen trunk blocking most of the way. It was covered in moss, and it looked damp. I tried to step over it, but my foot slipped on the slick bark and I fell forward. My knee hit the ground and a sharp pain shot up my leg. My flashlight flew out of my hand and rolled a few feet away, flickering. I let out a grunt and scrambled to grab it before it went out completely. My palms got coated in wet leaves. I pointed the flashlight around me while still on my hands and knees. That's when I heard shuffling behind me, like something moving closer. My heart slammed against my rib cage. I twisted around with the light, but I didn't see anything. I got to my feet, ignoring the ache in my knee. My pants were smeared with mud. I wiped my hands on them, but they stayed slippery. I climbed over the trunk. On the other side, the trail looked a bit wider, but the fog had thickened. I saw shadows drifting in front of me, but it was hard to tell if they were trees or something else. I forced one foot in front of the other. My mind raced with questions. Was someone messing with me? Did I stumble into a place I wasn't supposed to be? I couldn't figure it out, but I felt the weight of an unseen gaze on me. The forest seemed to breathe. I heard a soft, rhythmic sound, like a steady inhale and exhale. I realized it might just be my own breath, but it felt louder, like it came from the trees around me. My head started to pound. I told myself to stay calm, but that was almost impossible. My heart wouldn't slow down. As I walked, I noticed the branches again. They curved at odd angles, as if they were leaning toward me. Every now and then, a breeze would brush past, carrying that rotten smell. My nostrils flared in disgust. I tried not to gag. My flashlight caught glimpses of bark that looked strangely knotted, like bulging eyes or gnarled mouths. I kept shaking my head, trying to clear the weird images. I pressed on, searching for any sign of an exit or a landmark. Eventually, I saw a faint glow through the trees. I realized it might be moonlight breaking through a thinner part of the canopy. I headed in that direction, hoping it would lead me away from the center of the forest. The ground started to slope downward. My ankles wobbled on the uneven terrain. A few times, my foot slid on loose soil and I nearly toppled forward. I gritted my teeth and kept going. As I got closer to that glow, I heard a new sound. It was a scraping noise like nails dragging across wood. I stopped and held my breath, listening for it again. It repeated, slow and deliberate. My stomach clenched. I flashed my light toward the direction of the sound. I couldn't see anything but twisted trunks and tangled branches. I heard the scraping 2 more times, then it stopped. I debated if I should run or walk carefully. My gut told me to move as fast as I could, but I was afraid of stumbling into a root or falling into a hidden ditch. I settled for a brisk walk, almost a jog. My flashlight beam shook with each step, throwing wild shadows around me. I tried not to look at them. Every time I glanced to the sides, I saw movement that made my heart skip a beat. I kept going downhill until I reached a flatter area. The trees parted a bit, and I saw a hint of moonlight shining on a cluster of boulders. I stepped over to them, searching for any clear path out. That's when I heard my name whispered again, right in my ear. I jerked around, swinging the flashlight behind me. My lungs seized. There was nobody there, just open space and mist. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. My hands shook so badly that the flashlight beam wobbled. I stood there panting, trying to pull myself together. I decided to keep moving. I realized that if I stopped, I might lose my nerve completely. I circled around the boulders and found a narrow passage that led past them. The moonlight was stronger here, so I switched off my flashlight to save the battery. The ground was rocky but more solid than before. I followed that moonlit route, stepping carefully. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. I still felt that pressure all around me, like the forest was leaning in to watch. After a few minutes, I saw a break in the tree line. Beyond it, I spotted open space. My chest loosened a bit. I hurried forward, ignoring the throbbing in my knee. A few branches scratched my arms as I squeezed past. I smelled the fresh air and felt a hint of relief. When I stepped through the final line of trees, I found myself on a slope covered in low brush. Down below, I saw the faint outline of the dirt road where I had parked my car. It looked far away, but the sight gave me a surge of hope. I started down that slope, slipping a couple of times on loose stones. The last thing I noticed before leaving the forest behind was a soft sound, like a hushed laughter. I stopped just long enough to look back. The tree line was dark and the fog drifted along the trunks. I thought I saw a shape watching me from behind a large oak, but it faded into the shadows. My heart fluttered in my chest. I turned away and focused on getting down to the road. I stumbled a bit, but I stayed upright. I reached the car with shaking legs and fumbled with my keys until I finally got the door open. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. My breathing was ragged. My clothes were soaked in sweat. I glanced at the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see someone or something behind me. The headlights cut across the trail entrance. I saw only dense darkness. I started the engine and backed out. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. Once I hit the main road, I let out a shaky breath I'd been holding for what felt like an hour. I still can't explain everything I saw or heard. I felt watched from the moment I stepped onto that trail. The forest seemed alive and aware of me. I never believed in anything like that before, but now I'm not so sure. I keep thinking about those whispers. They sounded too real to dismiss as a breeze. I can't forget the silhouettes that darted behind the trees whenever I turned my flashlight on them. And that final laugh, or whatever it was, still rings in my head. I haven't gone back. I don't know if I ever will. That place didn't feel like a normal forest. It felt like something that saw me and followed me. Even now, when I think about it, I get this hollow feeling in my chest. My skin crawls. I find myself staring at the corner of my room, expecting to see a dark shape slip away. I've told a few friends about it, and they said maybe I was just tired or imagining things in the fog. I don't buy that. I felt it. I know something was there, and it felt wrong, like it wanted to keep me there until it decided what to do with me. All I know is that I'm staying away from isolated trails for a while. The silence I used to love has turned into something else. I can't enjoy that stillness anymore without hearing those whispers in my head. I still wake up at night feeling like the branches are swaying around me again, trying to pull me into their twisted shapes. I look around my bedroom and I tell myself it's over. But I'm not sure if that forest is done with me. I have this nagging sense that it could call me back someday, and next time I might not be able to walk away so easily.